Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, November 20th. Again, still waking up way later than I'd like. And this ritual festival has added additional missions and everything, but really I'll be lucky if I even get to this point of winning this, let alone all the way through, because I am just not having any real success with the ritual festival. And then we have also the problems of the, I guess we'll just try to open some packs real quick here. We only have like 5 packs anyways. Obviously I have not been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Extra off screen, so yeah, not a single new card in that 10 cards that we just got, and very possibly I already have 3 copies of all of these already. Nope, not quite that. Still need one more copy of this, and the rest of them are over 3. One thing I'd really like to see as far as the 2nd anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is to be able to turn the extra cards into crafting points. That would change everything. So we need to compete in one duel and destroy 8 cards. That's quite a bit compared to the previous requirements for the proficiency test too. Yeah, and we need to get to 5,500, and so far, me neglecting this event, I am only at 2,500, which I only have like 3 days, so we're gonna have to get really lucky today. It's just but you know what, it's possible. It's still possible, because what sometimes happens on these events is everybody is feeling just about the same as I'm feeling, and they are bored with the ritual. The best players have already gotten all the rewards and don't have a reason to stick around and continue with the competition. They should just move over to playing ranked, which the best players are probably going to be playing ranked a little bit anyways. So that might change the scope as far as just who you're actually playing against and how good they are as far as a team. Particularly in the case of ritual summons. There is a situation here where you just really have to understand the cards, and it's just really complicated. That wouldn't be so much the case in other instances, but it totally would be the case in this instance. So for the accountability section over the weekend, pathetically slow still working on the instructions. I finally did finish writing the instructions on the first pass of writing it, handed it over to ChatGPT. ChatGPT kind of dropped the ball on this one. Right now the OpenAI derivative ChatGPT website I'm using is limited, and in general I've heard that is the case, is that you can only really give about 300 pages, whatever it means by pages, to it as far as an input. And so I had to split the input a couple of times, and that's not particularly what I would have wanted to do. But yeah, I couldn't get it to really do anything great. I just had to rewrite what I'd written for brevity, and even in that it didn't do 100% brevity. And in doing some of the brevity rewriting, it lost some of the actual important information, so now I'm having to effectively rewrite it anyways a second time. There was a lot more progress made than it would sound like, though, in fairness, because in rewriting and finishing writing the first pass of the step-by-step instructions, I was able to actually go through the process of following the instructions and find that some things were wrong in my instructions and some things just didn't work. For instance, I was trying to run a advanced scene switcher macro by its name, which is not going to work when I figured out I could just run it by a hotkey. So I just programmed it by default to say, hey, whatever macros in OBS are assigned to F12, which is just the default, and I've added a place where you can change that to any single hotkey. Like whatever macros are associated with that, whether it's an advanced scene switcher macro or just an OBS hotkey trigger, will be triggered when the smart on-air sign first connects. That being said, I just started streaming and it didn't work. And I have no idea why it started to do that, and so there's just more room. And this is the thing, is that in a lot of these projects and programming, and in particular trying to build a finalized product that you can actually sell, there's just a lot of room for somebody to do it once as a programmer and say it worked for me, and just push it out the door, do it 3 or 4 times and say it works for me. And like I can really only go as far as testing so much on my one computer with my one amount of settings. I can't really justify completely uninstalling OBS and starting from scratch, or completely installing a new Windows operating system, or trying to install a Linux operating system or a Macintosh operating system to test that. So I'm hoping to get, ideally it would always work for everybody, but there is a decent chance that it just won't work for somebody for some reason. School computers in particular are concerned because they may just have policies built into them where you can't install software, and then you're basically screwed. They may have policies where you're always connecting through a VPN, and then you can't connect to the temporary, you wouldn't be able to connect to the temporary setup, so access point, Wi-Fi access points, and then you wouldn't be able to configure it. There's any number of viruses and just overall computer software that might interfere. Firewalls, antiviruses, things that could be in the way. Although, inherently, the only software you're being asked to install is OBS and Advanced Scene Switcher, so if you are hitting a point where an antivirus is saying OBS or Advanced Scene Switcher is a virus, you've got a bigger problem with your antivirus. But I have definitely heard that kind of situation before, where you have overzealous antivirus programs calling everything virus, or calling the wrong things viruses. But yeah, it is still pathetically slow, and a lot of that also too is just there is a very noticeable lack of desire on my part, and at some level, I am starting to also feel like, well, if I'm not going to work on the advanced, the smart on-air sign, I should just start making video game footage again. And if I start doing that, it will be, I'll never finish the product, and I'll never finish the project. So instead, I'm playing a lot on my cell phone, far too much. Which that's always been a problem ever since I installed 4 new smartphone apps to replace 1 shut down smartphone apps. We have somebody on the chat that's IXOLOXOLOXI. It's the same backwards as forwards, but saying hello, so I'll respond with hello. So yeah, I've been playing far too much with my cell phone. It's the same old thing, just, hey, I don't want to deal with this human language instruction stuff. It's so outside my wheelhouse. It definitely would be a thing if I was a manager who could afford an employee. I would hand to an employee and potentially have an employee on hand hired already to do for me. Or I've been watching Lex, which, yeah, watching Lex on Amazon Prime's freemium with ads is ridiculous and stupid. I'm into the 4th season. Inherently, I think it's a shame it took them like to get to the 4th season to really start to get to the point where I think they should have been at the very beginning. And I just kind of think, in particular, it's all out of order. Now, in fairness, they say the 4th season, but the first season was really 4 movies that were never split down into like 12 episodes. If they had more of a budget, I would have said that would have made a lot of sense too, is to chop down the first season into a full TV run of like 12 episodes. It also would have, if they had multiple episodes, they could have repeated the same lines of dialogue a lot more, which was a major problem in the first season, is that there was just massive amounts of silence where you're just hearing orchestral music in the background and entire scenes. I counted once 30 seconds of just nobody saying anything, and they never quite fixed that problem. It's a lot better in the 4th season, but it's still very much a case that the writer on the show wants to show and not tell, which is good for sci-fi certainly, but you can't take it to the extreme of having characters just not say anything at all. It's all very theatrical when people speak too, in that everybody else on the screen stops talking as the next person has their line and belts out their line, and then there's a long pause. And yeah, it gets rough, certainly there, but they do get it better in the 4th season. The main problem, though, I would say with the 4th season in particular, though, is that while the comedy is going up in modern days, having space alien probes that look like carrots jump up the butts of humans, and mostly guys, comes off as just a lot of homophobia comedy, which is what it would be described as today. And so it probably wouldn't play. It probably would be a show that would have gotten canceled on that, if not canceled on other things. I'd say by the 4th season of Lex, they did finally start to really show enough nudity between every 3 or 4 episodes. You'd get one scene of a butt or a boob, although oddly never really from the main female protagonist, which hiring her the way they hired her was probably a huge mistake. They should have probably hired a porn star of the time to be the celebrity female protagonist of Lex, and then she would have agreed to nudity in every episode if they asked, which obviously the actress playing Zev was not really comfortable with that. And watching Lex on Sci-Fi, when I originally watched it, it would have been completely censored, so I wouldn't have seen any of those things. That is weirdly something you could probably get away with now, is if Sci-Fi wanted to air something with as much nudity as Game of Thrones on it, it really wouldn't be that big of a concern or complaints. Although it probably wouldn't help a Sci-Fi channel or TCM or TNT or FX, any of those channels to really go that far with it, because the people that are still buying cable are probably older and more conservative people who would complain about it. You're not going to get a new generation of young people buying cable, so it's better just to have it on a streaming channel. But yeah, it definitely feels like it's out of order, because season 4 of Lex, and I'll stop talking about Lex pretty quickly here, has them on Earth dealing with humans, and for the most part having maybe just 2, maybe 3 episodes center around a joke episode concept that makes sense around Earth, and that's really what it kind of should have been. I think Farscape definitely learned a lot of lessons and does it a lot better, and Farscape by far is a much better show. But yeah, individual episodes you could kind of watch out of order, and it just really wouldn't matter that much. It feels a lot like a Red Dwarf episode too, where almost any Red Dwarf episode can be watched in almost any order, although there's so much time between Red Dwarf episodes. A brand new episode will look way better than a very old episode. The only thing I'd say episode 4 doesn't really get is it has aliens on Earth as being a big part of the gag, so they just don't understand how Earth works or humans work. Where you might want to establish the series to be more in space and sci-fi-ish first. Although, in fairness, up to this point, they really haven't. They didn't really do enough with space, and that's the problem with season 2. Is that season 2 was really their opportunity for every episode to be going to a new planet and running into a new group of people, and they do that, but it's just not well written or memorable. So it's by the time I'm at season 4, I've totally forgotten pretty much everything that happened in season 2, and it doesn't really establish a world that matters, because by the time you're at the end of season 2, they've completely destroyed the universe that all the events of and all the planets of season 2 occurred in. So if I were to move it around, I would probably have one pilot episode, a single episode, maybe even 2 or 3 episodes to make it feel like a pilot movie to establish the core, instead of having 3 or 4 longer movies called season 1. Then I would have season 4 where they're on Earth and they're dealing with Earth very quickly. In particular, one thing I don't know if they ever really got is you needed to convert the characters from being effectively escaped convicts or rebels fleeing on a stolen spaceship to being heroes and having morals. The gag that occurred from season 1 to pretty much the end of season 3 is that they're still pretty amoral characters. I'm gonna lose here, I should just let them win. And so because they're amoral characters and they just don't have a motivation to do the right thing, it's kind of hard to side for them and feel like they're supposed to be the heroes of the story. So by having the first season be on Earth, having them to learn about humans and start to finally argue right and wrong, which is something that they totally don't even discuss or think about in season 2 or season 3, that is a better idea. Certainly. Then you have the idea of season 2 where you would leave Earth in a season 2, ideally. In a new season 2, you would have season 2 occur, the actual season 2 occur, where you're going around to space and you're seeing that space people are all weird and there's a whole bunch of aliens. But then you have the establishment of trying to do right and wrong there, and then you can continue the theme that didn't happen in season 2 where there's an alien destroying all the planets that the Lex crew just visited. So you don't really have to change season 2 much at all. You just set it in the same universe that Earth was in. And then you can have season 3 be pretty much the same, because season 3 is all about all the people who had been killed by the space alien in season 2 are reincarnated on a planet fire and water, and like good souls went to water, bad souls went to fire. It's a heaven and hell analogy, and you introduce in season 3 a new bad guy who is in actuality, in the way it actually was made, the bad guy for season 4 too, but that's fine, having kind of a consistent bad guy. You just move it around a little bit and have a different bad guy for a new season 1. But yeah, I'm mostly rambling here, but my point being, if you could go back and remake it, which they really could, like, it wouldn't be that crazy to remake a lot of old TV shows, and instead we've seen very poor efforts so far of that happening. Whoops. But yeah, TV has done a really poor job of continuing rebooting TV shows. They often want to bring back and reboot shows that were successes, if they're going to bring anything back. Mostly they just want to do unscripted shows anyways. But yeah, Friends is kind of a great example there. You could probably remaster Friends in a way to have 5 new friends and have them reshoot that show in a more modern camera style, more modern time frame. Although that very well may not work. They're talking about making a spin-off show of the American spin-off show of The Office, of the British Office show, so that they are talking about stuff like that. But yeah, nobody really is asking to bring back awful, terrible, bad shows. And give that a second try. And a major part of that has to do with just claiming credits and potentially paying licenses. I would much rather roll the dice on a brand new show than make a adult show. The one that struck me in particular is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, it totally makes sense to reboot Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You don't have to really change much of anything. Maybe you consider getting rid of some of the middle seasons where it's kind of unnecessary. In particular when she went to college and there was just a secret government agency creating a Frankenstein-like monster. That season was fairly rough. And yeah, some of the early Buffy things are rough too, but yeah, just having a new fresh face of actors, having most of the episodes already written and scripted, you could really do it from beat for beat. You could try to add a new episode in between every old episode and you could double the length, and you could drop some of the absolute worst episodes. And you see that in plays, so why doesn't it, I really do question why it doesn't work on TV or movies. Why isn't there a new Dr. No being made with the current actor who's playing James Bond? Like, why not have whoever is playing James Bond right now say, hey, there's a slump here, we think we can get you more work by just having you remake the first James Bond movie, like Dr. No. You could pretty much get away with doing that every time you swap to a new James Bond actor. That totally happens in plays, as I understand it. People are always getting a new cast for plays. They're not changing the writing in plays very often, but in the dialogue. Yeah, wouldn't it have been wild if some actress after Sarah Michelle Gellar had become the remake of Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Like, I want to say somebody like Avril Lavigne, but she kind of was a singer and not an actress. But well, that is another problem, is that we just aren't getting crops of new actors anyways. Anyways, that was enough rambling for today. So that was a very long way of rambling and saying I'm way more focused on watching Lex's stupid sex comedy that takes 4 seasons to actually get its footing to be a sex comedy with a sci-fi background to it. Instead of working on the instructions for this mode. Oh, this is also just way too slow. Not destroying very many cards, which is one of the requests. Not getting victories. Let's go back to the loner decks and give it a try. As far as video game news, which we should just start video game news faster. We should really just stop doing the catch-up section. There's Black Friday sales galore, but honestly, not seeing anything that's super worth mentioning. We'll mention a few things certainly, but there is definitely issues. $3,000, $4,000. Let's summon the 4,000. Let's toss this. Let's activate this. I don't think I want to summon this, though. I think you want to discard this one way or another. It definitely is worth mentioning that as far as Black Friday sales, the best way to save money is to buy nothing, always. That's always the best way to save money in almost every case. Unfortunately, it does smack into the face of reality when you are talking about things that you are just incapable of not having or absolutely want to have. Like, the best way to save money on a house is to not buy a house. Is that a legitimate piece of advice for most people? Not really. And it's not even really true, because if you're paying for any kind of dwelling whatsoever, i.e. not living on the street homeless, you're paying some kind of rent almost certainly, unless you're very lucky. And it is actually cheaper to buy a house if you can get the credit and afford it in many situations than it is to rent in the long haul. And people often rent under assumptions that they are going to get a better job, they're going to move, and things are going to change, which is a possibility certainly, but I think people overestimate how much that really is going to happen. I think you're better off buying a house, and if you can afford it, and staying there and then selling the house if you get a better job, which very well may not. It also builds around the mentality that you may get a better job, but it never accounts for you may get a worse job too. But you have more protections and at least slightly slower process of being kicked out of a house being foreclosed on by the bank than a house that you're renting, or an apartment you're renting. But I was talking about Black Friday deals and gadgets and things in particular, things that you don't have to live with, you can live without. In that instance, buying nothing is the best way to save. But also, it's just kind of not a good sales in a lot of places, and you screw yourself over in particular if you have demanding children, which is to say if you have children at all. Because very few people can say Christmas is canceled or we don't celebrate Christmas, and I'll buy you toys and gifts throughout the year when they go on sale. So, because of that situation, you're constantly in this need to to buy toys for kids for Christmas, and then you're constantly being screwed over by minor sales. There probably is a business thought out there for a company that just makes very nice IOU cards online and ships them to people, but even that just does not really work. Um, but regardless, I still probably will be distracted throughout the Thanksgiving, Black Friday days. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and possibly Saturday and Sunday, and Monday, all days in which there'll just be a decent amount of sales happening, and it'll distract me, even though I'm, for the most part, not planning on buying anything at all. I may want to buy a new bug zapper, because my current bug zappers yesterday flickered the lights enough to set off my battery backups. So maybe the transformer on that high voltage it creates is burning out. It is about a year or two old. It might be 2 years old. Of course, if I get lucky, some of the components for my Smart On Air sign might be on sale, and so I might buy a few more for prototypes just to have multiple running. That is one other problem, is that I am pretty much just going to have to put it on sale in January if I finish it by January. Fairly untested, because I just don't have people that I can trust that would even get it set up and use it for a couple of months to give any kind of feedback at all. So yeah, I'm not expecting to accomplish much this week, but every week now, I mean, it's been probably a month now that I've been working on the Smart On Air sign. It's just a month that tells me I'm not scheduling videos, I'm not making YouTube footage. It's all just slowing down. Yeah, it definitely is not going to help my YouTube channel get any better. I'm teetering around 700 subscribers, so I still would. It's a highly unlikely by January 2024 I'd have 1,000 subscribers, let alone anywhere near the 4,000 hours of watch time. I'd have to get really successful. I did watch one of those awful YouTube videos that has a ton of views because it's about somebody pretending like they know anything about the YouTube algorithm, telling other wannabe YouTube streamers and content creators how to be successful on YouTube, which the best way really to be successful on YouTube is to make a video about how to be successful on YouTube, because that's the only scam that really works there. And yeah, the video was pretty awful around the idea of first thing you do is you just are searching for keywords people will search, and then you're making a video around that, so you're inherently compromising whatever art you may have wanted to originally create, which, yeah, people who make videos about how to be successful on YouTube are 100% compromised on that point, because nobody's really going to have a passion about making those types of videos. But yeah, sure, I could effectively clickbait, and that's all it really is saying. It's not using the phrase clickbait, but it is, how are you going to search engine optimize to to ensure that as many people click on your videos whatsoever. And that's all anybody really cares about. Or at least some content creators, that's all they care about. Yeah. There is a thought in that video, one thought I did have, that I name my pre-recorded footage just the name of the game and then a number. There really is no search engine optimization there, and turning it into a natural language sentence might make more sense. But I don't know what the natural language sentence really would be. It could be how to beat this game, or how to play, or how to criticize. Maybe make a series called How to Criticize, how to evaluate, or something like that. Probably criticize. None of it's really going to be that true, though. It's like how to play is the closest to a natural language sentence. For instance, like the game Prey. If I had renamed all that How to Play Prey, that would be fine, except for the way I play Prey may not be the way other people play Prey, so it's not 100%. It may not be the way other people play Prey, and I'm not particularly great at playing any one game. It would be a gimmick, certainly, that might work, though. Although, just having the phrase how to in the name may really not be enough. It may not get me any real larger numbers of views. And inherently, I doubt it would do anything to get longer watch time. Of course, they always talk about thumbnails, which I'm completely incapable of. Yeah, the ridiculousness of it taking me a month to program the smart on air sign would only be exacerbated 1,000 times fold if I tried to make custom thumbnails. I'd spend weeks and weeks and weeks and get nowhere doing it. We have someone on the chat, Ernest LB, saying bricked eyes, I see. I have no idea what that is. I'm just using the loner deck and failing miserably at this ritual event. Alright, let's really start talking about video game news at this point. Apparently a leaked GTA 5 database mentions Bully 2 and alleged scrap story DLC. It's not known how recent this file is. Bully 2 as a concept is definitely one to think about, in that it just can never happen. The idea of a bully existing in the same way that a bully existed in the minds of people when Bully 1 came out is just completely ridiculous. That's just not how bullying goes on in schools, if bullying goes on in schools at all. Which, in all fairness, it's also worth pointing out that the bully was not really a bully, per se, if you actually played the first Bully game, from what I've heard. He is actually more of an in-depth character, and while he may do bullying activities, Um, but yeah, he wasn't really just finding in the original Bully game. You weren't just picking on the weakest, most socially awkward, most outcast characters in Bully. You were actually fighting against other bully-like characters in those archetypes. And yes, there was always this thought that Bully 2 would have a female bully, which in actuality, well, physical bullying occurs statistically way more often, based on every statistics you can find by males. Mental bullying is by far much more prevalent amongst female students and much more persistent amongst female students. Of course, that was all decades ago. Nowadays, like, there really isn't that much bullying at all. If anything, there's possibly in a lot of schools SJW bullying, where if you're not progressive enough, you're getting bullied for not being accepting enough of the gay kids, of the nerdy kids, things like that. Like, nerds used to be a real insult, and geeks used to be a real insult. Nowadays, I mean, being technologically efficient is just by default assumed that you should be technologically efficient, and yeah. If there is going to be any high level of bullying in a modern time, it's going to be somebody doing it anonymously online. And how do you make a video game around that at all? At the core of it, the Bully video game, even though it has a lot of nostalgia and popularity around it, it is just the idea of a GTA game where you're in a school setting and it's just slightly different activities and slightly younger characters, and yeah, just trying to be a little bit more provocative and get more headlines. And Bully probably got way too many headlines than it wanted and caused more controversy than it was worth. So it's just never going to happen. If you were going to make a Bully 2, if GTA was going to do it, they probably would just make it a DLC of GTA 6 where you play as a young criminal kid, which that story could be told, certainly, and it might be a little bit provocative to say, here's our youngest member of our gang who is only 16 years old or 14 years old. It happens, certainly. I got lucky there. I did not realize that was going to happen. Ernest Elby responded saying, Blue Eyes Dragon is called Bricked Eyes by some of us. Yeah. Okay. I'm not in the Yu-Gi-Oh community in any real level, so any shortened verbiage I wouldn't be aware of. But yeah, I could see the latest GTA having a DLC where you play as a young character. And it could be a really young character. Certainly, it can't be super young. Like, you definitely don't want it to be a 12-year-old pulling out a gun, shooting people. And things like that. You could even tell an interesting story there where you play as a protagonist character who happens to be a parent, a mother or a father or whatever, of a kid. And so then you would have missions where all of a sudden you're no longer playing as the parent doing criminal activity throughout San Andreas or whatever city, and instead you're playing as a kid doing similar missions inside a school environment. But really that's about as far as it can go. You basically need a whole different style of creation if you were going to have a kid bully story happen that Rockstar probably could not do. Like, I really do think you could probably get away with making like a Japanese visual novel where you have a young character bullying people and people would just overlook it because it's a visual novel and nobody would care about it. But once you start to make a AAA game around that idea, it becomes too provocative for the mainstream audience. Yandere Simulator, the game that will never be finished, was kind of that same idea too. And yeah, again, very niche game, not a game that most people would purchase, most people would play. You just aren't going to be able to sell enough around that. And proper hero's journey style writing would really dictate that if you are going to make a bully character that is the bad guy at the beginning, he or she needs to eventually learn to be a better person and turn into a hero protagonist, or at least have some reason to be a really good anti-hero. You only have to really look at the reboot of Saints Row to see how terrible that can be really done, in that Saints Row brought out a younger generation of characters that were replacing the gangsters of the original Saints Row games, and nobody liked it. That on top of the latest Saints Row game being very poorly made, poorly optimized. So yeah, that's an incredibly long way of saying that all we really needed to do was look at the latest Saints Row game and see there is your reason why you would never ever see a Bully 2. Frankly, it's just too much work. If you got the phrase bully out of it, and Rockstar just wanted to make a game where you played as a female kid or a male kid, running around doing little tasks, that probably would work. It'd just probably come off a lot more like something like Costume Quest instead of Bully. Personally, I would say, while almost every game is some level of fantasy fulfillment, you're probably a little sick in the head if you want to play as a bully. Like, you probably need therapy. Like, I just don't see that. Like, when I was in school, I definitely had a lot of opportunity in which I could have been the bully. In pretty much any situation, I could have been the bully, and the only people that I ever did bully, so I guess I did do a little bit of it, were teachers that were harassing me or asking me to do something when I didn't want to do something. I very much had a policy of just give me a 0 and quit nagging about me doing homework or whatever. Like, if I'm not going to do the work, I'm not going to do the work. Ironically, a lot of that came down to just writing essays and doing that English human writing, which I still have absolutely no skill. So I probably have some mental disability in that specific avenue as far as just writing words that humans are supposed to read. I'm really good at writing code. We're pretty good at writing code, I would say. I am absolutely awful. 0 out of a scale of 0 to 100 talent writing words for humans. I'm fine with talking to people, but the process of going from my brain and mouth to pen and paper or keyboard and typing it just does not work. That's why I've only had some moderate success with just talking to a text-to-speech app. And more recently having ChatGPT rewrite me. So. But yeah. There was really never a kid I wanted to bully. Any kids I wanted to bully. Like, there is, I think, probably some level of you have to have a peer group that you're trying to impress if you're going to be a bully, and I was never really trying to impress anybody, and I think that probably helps if you have confidence in yourself to a certain level too. But yeah, I never really had a group of friends I was trying to show off to or anything like that, so it would be purely for my own personal sadistic pleasure to bully somebody if I had bullied somebody. There was a teacher in particular I bullied way too much, and I regretted it the next year. And there might have been single arguments and things like that, maybe even fights that happened with a couple people. But yeah, I was not certainly on a day-to-day basis trying to bully anybody. Of course, one of the things I think that happens there too, just to talk about bullying in general, is that people's perception of what their own actions versus people's reception of other people's actions can be very different, particularly in young kids or high school kids even. There's a certain level, I think, of just perhaps craziness is the wrong phrase, but distorted reality in younger people. So it is very possible that somebody would come back and say I did bully them, and I just totally don't remember it. That is very believable on my part, and you really can't do anything about that or say anything to it. It's just like, okay, if you felt that to be the case, that's your reality, and my reality just doesn't line up with that. My memories don't line up with that. This is taking forever. To wrap up though, the bigger thing, since Bully 2 is just a no-go, it's just not going to happen. The next thing to ask definitely would be, is there nothing here you can really special summon. Is there anything even special about the next GTA that can be done? And I question whether there is. I wouldn't be surprised if the next GTA is barely any different from the last GTA game, because there's just not a lot you can do down that path. It's already pushing the limits on being boycotted for being too violent and too much. The ESRB isn't going to allow more extreme forms of violence and things like that. If anything, by modern standards, less is going to be allowed. So it's not like the case that you could have a gang running fentanyl, cutting off people's hands, dissolving people in barrels of acid. Things that actually happen. Even reality is too extreme for what a GTA game is. you can't really improve the experience of stealing cars, the namesake of Grand Theft Auto. And all they're really interested in is getting you to play online and gamble at the casinos. So, feels very unlikely that the next GTA game will be anything of interest to anybody. It's just a game that lost its relevancy as soon as we hit a point where games can be on Steam and games can be released under a non-reviewed adults only ESRB type rating or no reviews whatsoever. So yeah, if you did want a game where you played as a real gangster, you definitely wouldn't turn to GTA, not without a massive amount of mods or some extra things being added to it. Arguably, you can do more criminal or more nasty things using mods in Skyrim than you can in GTA. And so yeah, it lost its relevancy as soon as the world evolved and it no longer was a case where all games pretty much had to be released on a console. Yeah. And so there's this weird plateau where you finally got the practical exam done, where GTA 5 or the next GTA, whatever it is, can only be so shocking, and then there'll just be way more shocking. It really isn't anything they can do. Steam and Valve and PC gaming can do better. Like the next day that a GTA comes out, the worst elements that GTA could have, you could have 100 times worse in a game released on Steam. And Steam and Valve are not going to stop you. Like, if you wanted to make a game that was just extremely cruel and violent and torturing puppies and things like that, you probably could get it on Steam as long as it doesn't create a controversy. They really aren't trying to limit anything by just tasteful speech, is the phrase to really think about there. So they will be more than willing to let you put a game on there where you're torturing puppies or something like that. But honestly, I guess the most controversial thing that a GTA game could do, and this will be the last thing I say on that aspect, is have it be a politician. Yeah. It wouldn't make a lot of sense, really, but it would be the most controversial thing, is to have some politician who would be an amalgamation of all the politicians who have been accused of or found guilty of doing something criminal put together. Now, immediately I imagine most people think I mean Trump, and to some level maybe you do make a few Trump references, but you probably wouldn't want to make too many or any, because honestly there's a fertile field here of a lot of Canadian politicians and just lower mayors and people like that, and mayors, representatives, senators, things like that. You could easily take the worst aspects of a lot of them and create a purely unique amalgamation politician person who is running San Andreas, or running to be in charge of San Andreas, while also spending his evenings as a criminal GTA things. Of course, the crime that most rich politicians do is very different from just like Grand Theft Auto. So it would be a weird mix and match there. It would make sense if you had multiple characters like the last GTA game, and one of them was a politician, and then one of them was more of a hands in the dirt style. But you could see making a character who is running for mayor, who has a bunch of chop shops that are acting like auto repair companies, and then you are just stealing cars for that reason. Moving on, we have a cosplay thing here that it's supposed to be for Cyberpunk 2077, and there is definitely a feeling that this has been photoshopped quite a bit. Obviously the background has been blurred, but I really question whether any of this face is of an actual actress, or if they haven't just conveniently put this chain necklace here as a way of attaching a photoshopped head to a non-photoshopped body, or maybe this whole thing is just CGI. But my main concern and problem here is, as far as the costume play of cosplay, this really does not look anything like a Cyberpunk 2077 outfit. First of all, I've never seen a necklace like this that would seem like it would be in line with any of the other jewelries. Even these, like, it looks like there might be hoop earrings here that might just be hair strands. But just like a black bra with nothing, this really just feels like this is a fighting outfit that somebody would do MMA in. And elbow pads. Why would you need fist pads and elbow pads if you have cyberpunk arms? And the prop gun here being held backwards, being handed to somebody, doesn't look unique. The shorts here don't look anything like Cyberpunk 2077. The tattoos are very much biker chick and not quite cyberpunk enough. There really is a case that in Cyberpunk's world, you probably wouldn't wear even as covering a bra if you wore a bra at all. So I just wanted to like point this out, as far as this is one of those examples where you have somebody that has a picture or they have an idea that they want to show off, and then they're slapping a video game label on it when it doesn't quite match. Particularly the costume in costume play here just screams not matching at all. Like there's nothing cyberpunk here in this outfit. At least in my opinion. We're not seeing a lot of cosplay. No, I'm not seeing a lot of cosplay. I'm perhaps not following too many in general, but there is that Suicide Squad game, and there's kind of a constant push to have Harley Quinn cosplayers. So I still do occasionally see a Harley Quinn, but she's a comic book character. Or arguably you could say, since she originally came from the animated Batman animated series, she's a cartoon character. She's not just by default going to be a video game character, even if she was in the outfits that were originally created from Arkham Asylum, which she's not really in that outfit anymore either. This is a weird listing here. Apparently, Konami is going to be re-releasing or releasing a bundle of the Felix the Cat game. I think it's just one game, where you're helping Felix save his girlfriend from an evil professor not named. This is an ESRB rating. Which, yeah, I actually played the Felix the Cat. That didn't work. The Felix the Cat NES game. And it totally was a weird experience. It wasn't a good game. The vast majority of non-Nintendo first party or second party developers and published games on the NES were awful. But particularly, you're talking about a game based on a comic book character that was not really relevant even when it originally came out. So it's only going to become less relevant. Yeah, it's only going to become less relevant as a re-release. It is an example, certainly Felix the Cat is, of a character that has been squandered, completely forgotten about. I wouldn't be surprised if Felix the Cat is actually public domain now, and so it is just really cheap for Konami to re-release this game without having to actually negotiate any license or anything like that. I really doubt that there is an actual demand out there. If anything, it really does just highlight that Konami is desperate to make as much money as possible from their video games right now, and yeah, they are willing to do anything and everything on that point. If it's digitally released only, I would have expected it to only be digitally released on the Nintendo Switch. It might be a case where this game was brought up by Nintendo and said, hey, this is an NES game, we want to release NES games on our eShop as part of releasing old NES games. And that got Konami thinking. They said, hey, if we're going to run some emulator to run Felix the Cat, why don't we also sell it on the PlayStation and the Windows PC? Notably, Konami being a Japanese company, not really caring about the Xbox infrastructure here. And so there is no Xbox listing. By the way, what I was doing there was using uBlock Origin to remove visual elements and make the ESRB pages potentially look a little bit better. So now I can't scroll down to the footer. I've hidden the footer in all the see more, see different games. I don't really love the ESRB. They are better than the MPAA, in my opinion, slightly, but I would say the ESRB's website is definitely a good first step for any parent who is concerned about what their kids are playing. That being said, a lot of parents are overly concerned about what their kids are playing to the point where they are really just seeking for an excuse to not buy video games at all or not enter into reality. There's a lot of people that live in an extremely old-fashioned mentality or just a non-reality that never actually existed, and they're trying to squeeze reality into their myopic viewpoints that will just never happen. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Borderlands 4 and a Tiny Tina's Wonderlands 2 have been mentioned in a LinkedIn profile. Borderlands Studio Gearbox is reportedly up for sale, is the subheadline here. I wouldn't be surprised if both of those are actually true. Although it is incredibly easy to say Borderlands 4, because you're just adding 1 to Borderlands 3 and Tiny Tina's 2. Like, without knowing anything else, as an employee, I could definitely say I am potentially working on Borderlands 4 or Tiny Tina Wonderlands 2. Because you very easily, as a programmer, low-level programmer, may not have a clue what you're working on. You may have been given a code word as far as the name of the project, and in early development in particular, whatever you're programming may look somewhat like a Borderlands or Tiny Tina game, but it could easily be something completely different, particularly in the case since 2K owns the Borderlands series, so at some level it makes a lot of sense to make a game that has at least the opportunity to feel like a Borderlands game, but not actually be called Borderlands. Or Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Yeah, as far as the Gearbox being up for sale, it makes every bit of sense. Like, Embracer Group is out of money and has screwed up horribly by just not really having a plan to have projects finished or even slightly in the works to balance out their massive acquisition money. And their only one plan seemed to center completely around the idea of being bought out themselves. Which, yeah, that isn't going to work either. I don't think I really need to do anything else. If this is his entire strategy, is to just cost me life every time I attack or play a card, he's gonna lose very quickly. Of course, it is also kind of unimportant. It's questionable who can afford to buy Gearbox and what you're really getting if you acquire Gearbox, because Gearbox, and I've said this before, effectively is 3 offices when you really only want the Frisco, Texas office at most as far as the talent there. So you're paying for 3 to acquire the one you want, and then you're getting licenses. I caused my own downfall there. That was my mistake. Yeah, you're effectively just getting the rights to Duke Nukem and pretty much nothing else. And while Devolver Digital might be interested in having Duke Nukem, they can't probably afford Gearbox, and while Microsoft is possibly willing to acquire anybody and everybody, I don't know if they succeed particularly well if they acquired Gearbox anyways, because I feel like if Microsoft acquired Gearbox, if they were allowed to, which they probably would be, they would probably just put them on Halo, and like 353 or whoever's working on Halo now would then be getting assistance by Gearbox, which might drastically change the way Halo plays, but maybe for the better too. It's not like they could do much worse. But no, I kind of take that back, because I do think Halo players are still very much holding on to the idea of Halo controlling and playing like it did in Halo 2, I think, particularly. And so if all of a sudden you had RPG elements, or if the controls just felt different, you'd probably lose more Halo fans than you would gain. They'd almost have to be a support team, and then if they ever were allowed to make anything else, it would have to be some kind of Halo spin-off game where you don't play as a Spartan. The Epic Games Store is promoting Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 Remastered, being available for pre-order and launching on February 14th, which I'm kind of excited to see this problem fixed, in that hopefully we will now be able to reasonably play Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 without it being just a nightmare to launch and run. That being said, we need full-on remakes too, which that would be definitely the next step that they should take, and I don't know if they really are going to take that step. Although, a full-on remake of Tomb Raider really should just be, this is the new Tomb Raider series, is that we're going to reset the story, we're going to combine the two timelines of the previous Tomb Raiders somehow, and we're going to introduce you to yet another Tomb Raider character. Start all over again with modern technology and sensibility. Video Games Chronicle says Poke Post pop-up experience is going to tour around the UK, France, and Germany this Christmas. Fans can send special Pikachu or Eevee cards to someone special. I assume these are Pokemon trading cards that you're sending and not just letters, but it might just be letters. It seems like more of these type of events happen around the UK and Europe than they do in the United States. Now, the United States is a very big place, so I wouldn't be surprised if there was a Poke Post that shows up in like LA and Manhattan, but yeah, you're not, I think, going to see the kind of cooperation you would need where you might see a Poke Post inside of every Target or Walmart, which that doesn't fully make sense either. It probably would be helpful if there were more gimmick type things happening inside of brick and mortar stores. But yeah, brick and mortar stores, I guess in general, are just not interested in doing those gimmicks. Toys R Us used to do those gimmicks all the time, and Toys R Us would get new groups of people to show up for those events, but it's questionable whether those new groups of people actually ever spend any money, and so that might have been part of the problem. Toys R Us in particular had like weekly Pokemon trading card tournaments, for a long time, where kids would just go on Saturdays and have these Pokemon tournaments. Is this gonna let me battle at all? Yeah. It does lean to make me wonder if perhaps Pokemon is losing some of its fandom in the United States, in the West. Which it could be, certainly. Like, Pokemon definitely deserves to lose its fandom. There's really no getting around that. They've done a very poor job with their video games, and I don't think that there's been massive changes in the trading card game to build up a new audience, or a way of even bringing in a new generation of players. And without Toys R Us, there's less Pokemon style toys these days. Moving on to the next bit of news. This should be also my last Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to play today. Infinity Ward has expanded again with a new studio in Austin, Texas. The company opened another studio in Spain earlier this year. This studio will work on Call of Duty franchise, which is recruiting for several roles, including UI and design. So I assume with Microsoft owning Activision Blizzard, they probably said gave the go-ahead for this. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that was just already in the works and Microsoft was kept out of the loop for the most part, or it was just too late to say no. Like, particularly, this would have been a great time for somebody to sneak a project through, and building a whole new studio is quite an accomplishment, certainly as far as sneaking something through. I would say, though, it does kind of feel like the hype around moving to Austin has dialed down to a simmer. There are still, I imagine, some people in California that think the grass is greener in Austin, Texas, that would like to move their offices there in particular. But, yeah. There is definitely a feeling I saw on Reddit when people were just talking about Texas versus California. Texas, in that Texas sells itself as having no sales tax, but it actually has fairly high, it has no state sales tax. I think Austin may have actually a city sales tax, but state of Texas in general tends to have a very high real estate tax, and also not provide arguably as good of services as what you might get in California, which just has a higher tax overall. I imagine there's probably a better place to start a video game company somewhere in one of the flyover states that they would never actually consider. Anyways, but yeah, there's no one place that is going to be right. If anything, I would say the state exactly next to or near Washington State is probably a good state to think about having a video game company, or just Richmond, Washington, where Microsoft is a great place to consider having a video game company studio start. Otherwise, it starts to be very questionable if you shouldn't just start a studio in completely other countries like Canada or Spain or the UK or Germany. Germany just got a $100 million fund, I believe it was, to promote video game companies and support them. So maybe there's an idea there. Or even move to Japan, have an office in Japan. Very few Western companies try to have offices in Japan when it might actually work fairly well there. You could particularly grab people who don't want to work at Square Enix or Konami anymore. In particular, in this story, though, I imagine what it is a case of there just being a need for as many people as possible, as many talented people you can hire as possible to make as many Call of Duty spin-off games or pieces of content or, and whatever. Like, I imagine there is definitely a scenario where the future for Activision Blizzard, now under Microsoft, may be a even larger push into making more and more Call of Duty style games, or just having more and more things with Call of Duty slapped on as a label. And if it goes that way, we may very well see that all the Blizzard games get ignored and forgotten about, and we don't have any more World of Warcraft or Hearthstone or Diablo or Overwatch. I can see Overwatch in particular being sidelined and shut down. One would hope that we would see more games from Activision Blizzard after the acquisition, but there's really no guarantee of that. We could very easily see less. And if we see less, we would then at least hope that the quality would be better, but there's no guarantee of that either. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says that the Returnal game director Harry Kruger has departed Housemarque after 14 years. Quote, "I will forever be proud of all the amazing things we've accomplished as a studio," end quote. This is a fairly good-looking guy as far as the photo here. Still not super professional, like no button shirt, no collared shirt, no tie, or at least no collar. Honestly, I think collars is good enough for game developers, but you have a fashionable green leather jacket and an off-green dark sweater and expensive haircut. I would say maybe tighten up that beard a little bit for the photo. It's a little scraggly, certainly, in the sense that you've got a fairly low point here where you're starting to shave, and then you're not really shaving much. You've just got a lot going on with the hair here. And the background maybe is a little distracting, and sitting down is a little unprofessional. This almost seems like this is a picture that was taken while he was sitting on a couch talking to somebody during some interview. The bigger story here, other than the photo that GameDeveloper.com chose, though, is that Returnal is kind of a amazing example of how you cannot just advertise your game into success. You can do a lot to help, certainly, but Returnal as a game was pushed and promoted quite a bit. I heard a lot of talk about it, I saw a lot of press releases about it, and still nobody really wanted to buy it and play it. I think a big part of that, if I recall correctly, was also that it was an Epic Games Store exclusive, so maybe it made decent money that way, but it certainly didn't help, in my mind, make Returnal feel like a game that was actually being played by people. It was a game that probably should have been sold as a B tier or a single A game, or even a double A game, and not promoted and sold as a triple A game. It does have this weird elements to it though, in which it definitely was selling itself on a mystery around what the narrative was, what the story was. And yet the game is a roguelike, so, or roguelike, technically. So it was expecting you to play the game over and over again, and yet the game was way too difficult, in my opinion, from what I saw of gameplay, to the point where the only people I really saw playing the game were speedrunners who were getting really good at it. It also didn't look very visually interesting as a roguelite. So it just had massive amounts of problems with it that feels like they didn't really get enough feedback, and maybe they should have spent half of their advertising budget on more Q&A and survey feedbacks before they started advertising the game. But yeah, it definitely feels like a game that has two game concepts mashed together in a poor way. One being a single player narrative mystery within the story, and the other being a roguelike mode where things are randomized. And I've often suggested that some games should have like abridged versions, modded in some way, where you skip over the grind and things like that. In this case, an abridged version like that probably wouldn't work, but I would say Returnal almost certainly should have had a locked down, non-randomized version of the game, and then after you beat the game, it should have unlocked a randomized mode. That way you could get a larger group of people just making it to the end of to the end of the story and to the credits, and then you unlock a randomized mode for people who want to play more. These guys just have a counter for everything I do. It does create a weird situation. He looks young enough, certainly, where he could go on and form a new studio. He could work on another project. Doesn't feel like he's old enough to justify really retiring. But it also probably feels like it's pretty easy to say that the game director of Returnal probably shouldn't be in charge of making the next game for Housemarque, because internally I imagine they don't feel like that was as big of a success as it should have been. They still really haven't gotten as far as I needed to go. As far as all of this is concerned, there's still cards that need to be destroyed, 9 more duels that need to happen in the next 3 days, ritual summon 2 more times, duel in the festival 6 more times for all these special quests. Then these daily quests are mostly done. Although in all fairness, we are also getting close to the point where I need to do 1 more solo gameplay. And then there's always the duel live. So that brings us up to a nicer situation as far as gyms. Which very possibly there is a pack, an expansion pack that I should get. I'm hoping what happens is that this Master Duel Proficiency test stops at, well, it could stop at 7 it probably stops at 9. Might stop at 10. I'm hoping it doesn't just go on forever or add a bunch more. We'll do the test next stream, and then the clear conditions here of special summoning 10 monsters is not that hard, although getting 5 legacy packs for that is not much reward either. Them adding the proficiency pack is annoying. It's just one more thing to do. And yeah, it's just highly unlikely in the next 10 days that I'll accomplish everything I'd like to accomplish in the Ritual Festival and get back to playing Ranked and get up to Diamond. And that is just a case that it happens every month, is that I can get up to whatever this is, Crystal, and then they throw out an event duel, and then that becomes the distraction. And the only people that could possibly accomplish both are people that's playing way more Yu-Gi-Oh! Than you'd really want to, or I would really want to. Let's just start focusing on the news completely now. City Skylines 2's DLC has been delayed to prioritizing fixing the base game, which inherently, this is, I think, a problem that is being highlighted by DLC, in that there's just this ever increasing rush to get games out as quickly as possible in unfinished states, but then there is also this demand that every game has DLC. Plus it opens up the door that anything you haven't finished in the initial launch, you can just remove and say that will be added to the DLC. So it gives you this window of opportunity in which you can make excuses. But overall, it is definitely not a good look for City Skylines 2, which could have just been in general delayed so that the base game was working on day 1 launch, and then you don't have this cascading problem of now the DLC being delayed. So you've now had 2 negative headlines, in that base game came out and people undoubtedly said it was broken, and now you've got a second negative headline saying that the DLC is being delayed, where you could have just had 1 negative headline overall and said the base game is delayed, and then released it in a better state, which would have given you a better positive headline to balance out the negative headline of the launch version of the base game being delayed. Moving on, it's not particularly video game related, and honestly I'm not sure anybody really knows the full story here, but the OpenAI CEO, former OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, was ousted, and it feels like the board basically were calling him a liar in more gentle terms, that he had lied to them about something, which I wouldn't be surprised if he did, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is kind of standard operating procedure for CEOs and presidents to lie to the board members. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of board members want to be lied to. But yeah, they kicked out Sam Altman. I think I've heard that like 4 other people also quit with Sam Altman being kicked out. Inherently, I guess he's a guy that people like to work for, and that's always a good quality in a CEO or a higher manager, and it's kind of a rare quality. And yeah, there was even some rumors that he might get back in the position of OpenAI. Instead, he's now joining Microsoft, which Microsoft themselves would like an artificial intelligence competitor to OpenAI. But yeah, you're basically hiring a CEO here. You're not hiring a programmer that could help them make AI. You might have a CEO here that could help the teams that already exist at Microsoft to make their, I think they're calling it Copilot, they partnered with a developer in World to create a generative AI tool that would aid first-party games. The question here, though, is he even going to be working under Microsoft Game Studio or Microsoft Gaming, or is he just going to be working at Microsoft, and are we just going to get some kind of better Siri type product for Windows? It'll take a while, I imagine, for the dust to settle, and I imagine this is really just another example, probably a undeniable example of corporate protectionism and cronyism, in that some CEO who's fairly rich, I imagine, gets fired abruptly, and immediately his friends at Microsoft hire him on. Whereas if your average employee, your average burger flipper or Walmart checkout person gets fired, they're not going to have rich friends that can hire them the day after they've been fired. No way. And that's an example of cronyism, and certainly unfair too. Some people will have friends that can hire them immediately if they got fired, but a lot of people can't. A lot of the poor people who are living paycheck for paycheck can't. As far as hiring high-level employees, such as managers and CEOs, you would think it should take more time than that. That there shouldn't be a way that it just happens a day later. That such high-level employees should be investigated and researched, and it should take a while. And usually it does take a long while too. Anyways, it's not particularly very video game related until it becomes video game related. The game Pinball M launches November 30th with the Thing Pinball. It's going to launch on the PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC via Steam. So this might be a case of a pinball company, a new pinball software. Although, noticeably, this is still Zen Studios, so it's the exact same company that made Pinball FX, and then Pinball FX 2, and then Pinball FX a second time, rebooting the naming scheme. So, yeah. If I recall correctly, Pinball M was the idea that they were going to sell horror, scarier pinballs, games, pinball tables, and they were separating it out because of that, instead of just having it all in the same platform. But honestly, it just feels like it's an excuse for Zen Studios to once again try and sell the same thing, which has always been the problem too. Is that there has been a lot of Zen Studios in particular re-releases. Pinball Arcade wasn't much better either, though, of making multiple releases of the same tables. Previously it was announced they would have Chucky's Killer Pinball, Dead by Daylight, Duke Nukem's Big Shot Pinball, and Wrath of the Elder Gods Director's Cut. So yeah, Pinball M is definitely, I guess, the rated M pinballs is what they're implying with that. Kind of make more sense if it was Pinball H for horror. The Nier series apparently will continue as long as Yoko Taro remains alive, the producer says, but the pair are set to reveal a separate project next year, which, I mean, it's a little bit of a weird thing, even I think for a Japanese producer to say as long as this other director is alive, we'll continue to make the Nier series, taking the decision out of the hands of Yoko Taro, who might very well say, I'm done with the Nier series. And arguably, I think there is a natural ending point for the Nier series anyways, because while Nier Automata was major successful, it's not really a series that I think would benefit from becoming like Final Fantasy and just having game upon sequel upon sequel upon sequel upon sequel. It has more of a strong story to tell, and I don't want to see the Nier series get boiled down to just unimportant spin-offs or overworking Yoko Taro. Anyways, but yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to say in general. Perhaps a better way to phrase it would be to say we plan on making more Nier series games in the future, instead of saying until this person is dead they are forever tied down to the Nier series. And but you see that certainly in a lot of cases, that there is a lot of pressure put on game developers, Japanese game developers in particular. The Smash Brothers developer is a great example of that, where the guy is just saying, I'm tired of making Smash Brothers games, stop demanding Smash Brothers games. Nintendo keeps forcing me to make more Smash Brothers games. Yeah, it does seem to be that there is a decent amount of pressure being put on these creative people who would prefer not to create that game, yet another sequel for the game they're famous for. And they definitely come off like they don't have a say in the matter, and at a certain level they may not have a say in the matter. They probably are just employees being told what to do by the managers. They could probably leave to a different company, and we're seeing more of that happen in Japan. I wouldn't be surprised if that is more of the reasons why we're seeing increased numbers of producers and developers leave companies in general, but that is still definitely not the norm in Japan, to leave and form your own company or leave and work for a different company. There are definitely a lot of older Japanese people that still live in that mentality of you're going to work for the same company for your entire life until you die of overwork and exhaustion. And Yoko Taro is probably one of those type of older employees. Moving on. Xbox Series S Black Friday UK sales dropped the console price down to £189, although I don't know what the translation there is, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if in the US you can probably get the Series S for $200 equivalent. But it is definitely a hard argument to get the Series S still. One thing that I think would really sell the Series S, if they had a lot of extra on them, is the idea of having an external disk drive that you could plug into it, that you could even rent. There might even have been a program where you mailed in discs and you got the game added to your library for the Xbox. If there is something like that, it's definitely not advertised very well. But yeah, it only really makes sense to have the Series S if you already have an Xbox One or an Xbox Series X, that you can put old discs in and then have it add to your library that way. But even in that case, that I don't think it works that way. I think you always have to have the old disc in the drive, so getting a Series S is 100% digital only, so it really doesn't make any sense at all. I did see some slick deals for like 4K UHD movies, like the Mario movie in 4K plus digital edition was on sale for like $10 on Slick Deals. I don't know if it's still on sale, but yeah. There is this thought, certainly, that this is possibly the last year that Best Buy and possibly other stores are going to sell 4K UHD discs. I don't think there's going to be a new standard to replace it either. So maybe now is the time to buy a Blu-ray player that's 4K UHD. Maybe now is the time to start buying movies. Maybe just buy the movies and wait to buy a player if you don't have one. But yeah, physical media may be on the verge of going out the window. But in all fairness, while I have seen a lot of 4K UHD movies being sold, the vast majority of the movies are not necessary to be owned. It really is just, unless it's a super rare Criterion Collection style or super rare anime series, it's going to be on some kind of streaming service, and that's good enough. It's always going to be on a streaming service. It's not going to disappear. Although it may not disappear, it may also be locked behind increasing rates. Apparently Netflix is raising its rates, or increasing ads, which, yeah, you're definitely making a bet here that something might be on Amazon Prime now, and it may stay on Amazon Prime, but it might move over to the Amazon Freemium with ads, and they might just add more ads and more ads to the point where you're watching 4 or 5 ads just to watch a single movie before it starts, and then 4 or 5 ads in the middle of the movie, and that would be unacceptable. So there still is an argument to having physical media. The Last of Us Season 1 was also on sale for Blu-ray, and that's fairly brand new and fairly popular series. I don't think too many people really need to own that either. The Mario movie was really the only one that stood out because that's a kids movie, and I could see kids having maybe a portable 4K Blu-ray player if such a thing exists, or wanting to watch the movie many times over. Watching it once a week, it is very believable for little kids. But yeah, most movies are not needed to be owned. It's just a very old way of thinking of things, and arguably, if you want it really cheap, you probably should be buying DVDs, not 4K UHD discs. Moving on with the story, Chess Masters Games' Spirit Tea has hit $1 million in revenue in the launch week, which is probably a very big name for what looks like a very niche, small point-and-click adventure game. Although it's very weird, and there's really not a lot of comparisons to make to say you've just made $1 million. Usually, people are promoting that they have 100,000 units sold, 300,000 units sold, over 1 million players at the same time. To just say $1 million is a much more difficult calculation, because if this game was $5 and they made $1 million, then they have way more players playing it or purchasing it, at least, than if it was a $60 game and they made $1 million. Apparently this is a New Life Sim RPG. It looks like a point-and-click adventure game to me. But yeah, I don't have any real way of comparing $1 million. Sounds like a big number, but if they had said $999,999, it wouldn't have sounded like a big number. That's about the smallest big number you can throw out and actually celebrate. And if anything, that feels like that was a GameDeveloper.com advertisement hiding as an article. I believe this story on Video Games Chronicle is being reposted from Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb, who I question his concern level as far as being accurate, because I've definitely seen instances where he's just spouted the wrong thing, and that was maybe a year or two ago when he was just saying the wrong thing in a bombcast, and people even in the bombcast were correcting him, and they eventually got him to realize he was saying the wrong thing, and he goes, oh well, he just doesn't care if the facts he's spouting in the bombcast was correct or not. and then he's reported on rumors before and been completely incorrect on that. He definitely was hired at Giant Bomb to be the newsbreaker and talk about rumors, but the problem with being a rumor monger, which is basically all he is that you get things wrong and you lose credibility when you get things wrong. And so it's kind of a shame that more mainstream video game journalists haven't really realized that he doesn't really have the journalistic integrity to be used as a source exclusively. And nobody does. And this is the difference between video game journalism and real journalism, is that most real journalism would want two separate, completely separate sources to confirm something, or they would want to at least verify the information that another reporting agency is saying by talking to the source of that original in that original case. But yeah, Jeff Grubb says nobody nowhere, which is very broad terms, and that was a rough quote, rephrasing of what he said, is working on Star Wars The Old Republic remake, which, yeah, might be true, might not be. Kind of doesn't matter, too. This is another great example of news that will not affect you in any way whatsoever, because tomorrow a Knights of the Old Republic remake may start or resume development, or they may never make a Knights of the Old Republic remake. Either way, you're not getting any actionable news in which you can do anything. You can't pre-order a game that hasn't been announced. You can't get really hyped around a game that hasn't been announced. You definitely can't buy a game that hasn't been announced. So just ignore these types of articles in general. You're better off, and if you ignore them and play the old Knights of the Old Republic, or if you can, or play a different game. Still not sure why my middle mouse button click just weirdly opens new tabs sometimes. I think I understand why, come to think of it, but it's weird. Apparently, according to GameDeveloper.com, Black Myth Wukong developers have been accused of enabling a sexist culture. Alleged comments made by the game science staff go to highlight a larger issue of sexism within the Chinese tech industry. As a United States citizen, as a Westerner, I wouldn't be surprised if there is sexism in the Chinese culture in general, or in the Chinese video game company. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if there's just slightly different definitions of what sexism even is considered amongst, I'd say, the females of China in general. I would argue, if I did a deep dive, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a heavy level of anti-male sexism in China in general, since there's just so many males and they are effectively devalued severely. So there might very well be negative sexism against males, positive sexism for males, negative sexism for females, positive sexism from females, and same is true in the West. It's just different levels and different ways it presents itself. But I would say in general, there's very little you could probably do about it. Also, like, at a certain level, the Chinese game development market is such a newborn baby that it's just going to have growing pains to become a good market that can actually make good video games first. I would much prefer good video games coming out of China before I heard that sexism has been cured in China, which is a almost certainly unattainable goal. And this might very well highlight an example of SJWs, armchair activists, not really keeping the focus on the goal in general of having a successful company that doesn't go bankrupt, and instead is dragging the companies to have just ever more HR meetings about sexism. And yeah, we don't want sexism, certainly, but a lot of people see it, whether it's there or not, too. But yeah, I don't think there's really much we as Westerners could even do about it. Either we don't buy a game like Black Myth Wukong, which we weren't going to buy anyways, and we boycott the company, which we were going to do that probably anyways, or we buy the game. I mean, it's about as much as you can control there. First step first, in my opinion, is definitely just getting good games to be developed in China, and they are so far away from, on average, releasing a good game that a Westerner would even want to play, that all other issues are secondary to that idea in the first place. And unfortunately, that is very much a capitalist mentality coming from me of all people, in that I'm effectively making the argument that any kind of like health and safety requirements or equal opportunity or fair pay requirements be suspended until the industry itself is profitable and sustainable, which is a terrible statement to effectively make. But as a consumer of video games, as the consumer, that's kind of what we want. It's like we don't care how the sausage is made. We want good games first and foremost. Then we will support the improvement of conditions of the workers. But yeah, that is every new industry, every old industry always pushes that concept, is that if we have to follow these rules and regulations, if we have to make the work safer, if we have to be less sexist at work, then we'll make worse products, and then we won't be able to make enough money, and then we won't succeed. Which the right answer to that is good, then you should fail, because you are being required to do all of these things as a part of society, and if you can't do all these things and succeed, then the industry in total might as well just fail. And we're going to definitely see that with automation and robotics and AI, is we're going to see automation saying, if we can't get rid of all of our employees and have 100% automation and robotics, we won't be able to succeed. Well, Amazon.com or whatever company is talking in that case, then you should fail. And we should maintain jobs, or find a way that we can balance a society where most people are not working because all jobs have been taken over by robotics, which that's ideas like UBI too. But yeah, we can't just have Amazon.com be an incredibly successful company that leads to half of the world's population being unemployed, which at a certain point that would balance out, but only after major upheaval, because people would stop having money to actually buy on Amazon. Speaking of laying off people, here's our next story. Immortals of Avian Studio has laid off people, and that they say the CEO is saying it was down to poor sales in a crowded market. Red Robin says he hopes a 50% sale and a major update will attract new players. So effectively, what he's saying here, and you gotta read between the lines a little bit, is that as the publisher and the deciders, which is probably not really the developer. It's pretty much the publisher that decides when a game is released and how much it's advertised. So the publisher is 100% got to take the blame here for them releasing Immortals of Avium when they did, and doing a pretty poor job of advertising what it is. Even now, in my mind, Immortals of Avium feels like it is not much more than a vertical slice of a game, and that there is no real story behind it or narrative reason. That it doesn't feel like a game that really has a main protagonist. It doesn't feel like a game, in my mind, that has a story and has credits and an ending. And all of that may be inaccurate, but that is what I think of when I think of Immortals of Avium because of the advertising. And they certainly could have released that game either in February or January or waited 6 months. It is crazy that these publishers don't have enough patience, or they're in weird situations where they have to release games in certain fiscal quarters. Because really, you put out Immortals of Avium out February 10th or January 10th, it would have had no competition at all. It would have been this interesting new game you can play that would have had no competition at all. And it is the ideal example of a game that should have experimented on its release window instead of just trying to release slightly before the Christmas season happened, which is when it did release, a couple months before, but even then it was still a crowded market. Now, notably, I question if any of the layoffs that happened here were of the publisher division, even if it's the same company. I wouldn't be surprised if it is 100% QA people and programmers and developers. But yeah, it definitely was the kind of game that should have experimented in the release window. It's a game that is a new series. Same is kind of true for Forspoken. If 2024 started with Immortals of Avium and Forspoken being two games coming out in January and February, both of those games would have had more people playing them and more sales. Or at the very least, they could have tried to target a release where the game was free at the Epic Games Store in January, February, and that would have given them more of a chance of gaining an audience also. Let's see. Perhaps talk too much about Cyan. What was I specifically highlighting? Oh, they retweeted that Mist Online on the 18th is going to open yet a new bit of content, the Fall of Deny Memorial Island, a new cavern area to explore, which, yeah, it is very weird that Mist Online as a fan-made public effort is still adding content to the concept of Mist Online, which only really ran, I think, for maybe a year at most. Suffice it to say, fans of Mist are fans for life, and I'm probably not as big of a rabid fan as most Mist fans, but I definitely am a fan, and that's in part why I follow them on Twitter and why I see more of their minimal announcements for their fan base. We still aren't seeing any refurbished Steam Decks. I wouldn't be surprised if excuse me, I wouldn't be surprised if the Steam Deck LCD versions, for the most part, are never going to see any more refurbed units sold. There is a point here where if somebody sent in a broken Steam Deck to be fixed or repaired, they would hold on to the Steam Deck that was sent in and broken for parts instead of refurbishing it and selling it, and they may very well get to a point where they're going to have people send in their old Steam Decks and then them returning a new Steam Deck, which a trade-up program wouldn't be a crazy idea. They really haven't talked about anything like that, but I could see sending in a 64 gigabyte or 256 gigabyte version and getting returned a 512 gigabyte version in a trade-up program for maybe free, or if it's broken, or maybe an extra price. I could also really love to see the idea of sending in a old Steam Deck to get credit towards the purchase of an OLED Steam Deck. The internals are fairly different, so I don't know how many bits of parts Steam and Valve even really need. But even the first generation Steam Decks seem to not really break that often. And so there's definitely a concern there that I'll never get a cheap Steam Deck at this rate, and probably shouldn't want to buy a cheap Steam Deck. Now, I am fairly certain my macro is broken, and it should be clicking like this button to get things in order like this, but it's not. And so, because of that, I feel like my chart is broken. One way I could avoid dealing with that is I could spend the extra time to just grab all of the top 100 bits of games, but that would slow down the macro even more. Overall, instead of looking at the chart that's going to be mostly broken, we'll just look at this and see that for the most part we're still seeing the same games being played. The Space War looks like it might be new. A lot of people playing Payday 2 instead of Payday 3. Baldur's Gate 3, Naraka Blade Point. I think Baldur's Gate 3 are really popular amongst players, and yet there's really not a lot new to say, and that's going to be the case for a lot of games like Don't Starve Together. Hearts of Iron 4 is about the only game here that is slightly surprising, but its 24-hour peak is also only 35,000, and when you really look at it, you're only talking the top 11 games, including Wallpaper Engine, even have 100,000 people launching the game. Very, very few people are playing video games right now, with the exception of a lot of bots, I assume, at Counter-Strike Go, and probably even decent amounts of bots for Dota and PUBG. But yeah, this is just not the time really where people are playing games, which I kind of would have suspected that. But yeah, we've seen here of the chart here that got new information. PUBG is dropping down a little bit back into the chart below the 400,000 mark. We have Apex Legends, Naraka Blade Point was not collected as the data. Baldur's Gate 3 is going up a little bit, but overall Baldur's Gate 3 has trended from a major point down lower and lower and lower. And then some of these other games are showing up. We have a game called Lethal Company that might be somewhat new. And then we're not quite to the point yet on Steam where the sale is going, which that would be the next big thing. Certainly this Half-Life deal as a choice. What also would be on sale? I think the only thing I don't own is probably Half-Life Alyx, because I don't own VR. Yeah. Half-Life Complete is already in my library. All these other things. Noticeably though, this is them very kindly, very slowly trying to get you to forget about the Black Mesa fan mod too, because Black Mesa's not on sale. Turn-based Carnival collection of games on sale. Deathloop, another game that was promoted quite a bit and I don't think ever really got as many players as they wanted. Liza P, I guess people are playing it, but it didn't knock people's socks off, and it's still just a Bloodborne clone, probably even more than an Elden Ring clone. And then some GTA stuff on sale. Gears 5 being $10 might be worth it at that price. But yeah, overall, not a lot going on. Which makes a lot of sense too, because why would anything go on now when it really should be happening at the sale, which I wouldn't be surprised if we see a fall Black Friday sale on Steam and then several new games come out and as kind of semi-surprise releases. I didn't run into the interstitial tag there on Video Games Chronicle. I don't know why. Let's see. Well, these are Video Games Chronicle articles. Nintendo of America's launched its Black Friday digital game sales. Cyber deals are offering up to 50% off games for the next 2 weeks. There really is no good reason to buy games digitally on the Switch or Nintendo, considering they just shut down the 3DS online store and all of that. So you know anything you buy now will not be playable in 4 or 5 years, even if it is decently likely that it would be transferable to whatever the next Nintendo console is. Of course, some of these Nintendo games that might be on sale are exclusive first-party Nintendo games that you can't get anywhere else. So it is either between purchasing it from Nintendo on sale or getting a ROM, and I don't know. I'll leave it up to individual people whether Nintendo actually deserves money to sell you ROMs that they've put very poor amounts of polish on. Nintendo has some of the best old games and has done by far the worst amount of work as far as adding new features or adding polish to it or just even emulating the games well. Some of these articles we may have already talked about. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League closed alpha test has been announced. Digital Foundry kind of talked about this game a little bit, and yeah, they didn't really have anything very impressive to say about it. In particular, I feel like this game would have just been better if it had come out a lot earlier or closer to when it was announced, or if it was a surprise announcement. But yeah, it almost comes down to the idea of, could you very quickly replace these 3D models and make it a Birds of Prey game instead? Or replace these 3 models and have Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman in the group instead, because the Suicide Squad, as far as King Shark and Captain Boomerang and Deadshot. All those characters are uninteresting at this point. Yep. And I'd say they probably have to rethink Deadshot a little bit too, because they made Deadshot an African black-skinned character so that Will Smith could play him in a movie, when in the comics that's highly unlikely to be the case. I'm pretty sure he's white in the comics. And now that Will Smith is on the outs and nobody likes him, you're in this weird position where you can't really change him back. So they probably will stop emphasizing Deadshot in the Suicide Squad like they already have. We already talked about Knights of the Old Republic reportedly not currently in development. Cities Skylines 2 DLC being delayed. Destiny 2's player count has dropped to an all-time low on Steam. Declining player numbers coincide with layoffs at Bungie and reported content delays. Honestly, I think that is a fallacious, if that's the right word. I think that's a unfair comparison and correlation. I suspect that the player count on Destiny 2 has dropped because people are just tired of playing Destiny 2 after all this time. And it is not some kind of coordinated boycott effort to boycott Bungie because there's layoffs, or a coordinated effort to boycott Bungie because there's content delays. Now, there is a slight connection that if all the content hadn't been delayed, maybe that would have maintained some of the audience, but Destiny 2 is just old, and the concept of Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 was that it was somehow going to make a game as service that just lasted forever, and something kind of like World of Warcraft, but even World of Warcraft, it has way fewer players now than it once did. It just doesn't work. People are not going to stick with the same thing over and over again until they can convince people to have full-on religious beliefs around video games, that they're going to play that video game every Sunday and that they have devoted their entire life to it until they die. Until you can get somebody that fanatically devoted to a video game, nobody is going to play a video game for more than a few years at most. And in most cases, most people only want to play a video game for a few weeks, if maybe a couple of months. And I definitely hope we don't get to the point where they figure out a way to make game players religious fanatics. You kind of see that with Call of Duty, where there is just this default thought that I will buy the next Call of Duty game and I will play it, but most Call of Duty players that do that aren't particularly being satisfied either. And that only works with Call of Duty because they're constantly reselling a new product and rehashing the same product over and over again. Destiny 2 is kind of selling the same product and just adding small modifications instead of packaging it like it was a whole new game. If we were up to Destiny 4, 5, or 6 at this point, they probably would have a slightly higher player base, because every new number would convince people to go back to Destiny and make them think there was something new there, even if it was very small changes that was actually happening. PS5 Black Friday deals cut the console price to £360 in the UK. This is, I assume, the standard PS5 with the disc drive, not the PS5 Slim. Which again, I just have no idea what the comparison from pounds to US dollars are right now. PlayStation Plus Premium has added Baldur's Gate 3 and Column Trials. Try out one of the highest rated games of the year and one of the lowest rated games. And this almost certainly highlights how there are just contracts out there that people cannot get out of or people are not willing to spend any more energy on to get out of. So then maybe the Golem creator said, let's put our game out for trial on PlayStation Plus Premium, and Sony said fine, whatever. Or maybe they had negotiated it before it did even come out. Yep. Undoubtedly, you might see a few people spending a few seconds playing a Golem before getting frustrated and leaving, but you're definitely going to get more benefit as a player and as a publisher with the Baldur's Gate 3 trial, because there's definitely people that are hearing about Baldur's Gate 3 but have not been willing to try it because of it being a fantasy game or it being based off of Dungeons and Dragons. So you might get a small collection of people that try it for free and then find they like it. I wouldn't be surprised if you get a lot of people that try it for free though and actually don't like it either. Yeah, that is definitely part of my concern too, is that on top of just not really wanting to commit a lot of time to a game like Baldur's Gate 3, I could see it being too Dungeon and Dragon based and just a little too slow, a little too methodical, a little too nerdy, for lack of a better term. We already talked about the Returnal director leaving Housemarque, and the leaked GTA 5 database, and Immortals of Adium layoffs. Nintendo's UK Black Friday deals offers a Switch OLED with Mario Kart 8 for £57 off. The bundle also includes 3 months of Switch Online membership, totaling up £309.99. Which, okay. It's probably not a terrible deal. Again, not really knowing how much that translates to US dollars. But you basically have to have Mario Kart 8, and you basically have to have online to, if you want to play Mario Kart 8 online, for that to make sense. Although the real choice here and the real decision is just to buy nothing Nintendo, for we know that by this time next year there will be a new Nintendo console. If there isn't, pretty much every mainstream video game journalist and video game journalist in the world is going to have to eat their hat. Some major event would have had to have delayed it. We already talked about the Xbox Series S Black Friday UK sales. Xbox Series X Black Friday UK sales see discounts up to £120 off. So, you know, selling around £350. Which that would be the one to buy. There was even a sale for like that ROG Ally at Best Buy where they've got it down to like $600, which is still way too expensive. But I guess if you just must have an ROG Ally, now would be the time to buy it. But it was also a very complicated thing where you basically had to buy it at Best Buy with, I think, a Best Buy store card to get store credits to get it down to be $600. Just a lot of hoops to jump through. We already talked about this. We already talked about this. We already talked about this. We talked about in the previous stream Half-Life marking its 25th anniversary with game update and documentary, although notably no new announcements for any new games from Valve or no new Half-Life game at all. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered has been officially announced for PS5 and the upgrade path has been detailed. I'll say check out this Video Games Chronicle article if you're interested in what the upgrade path is. Then Amazon's Black Friday deals event is now live. But yeah, I didn't really see too much here. Xbox Series S for $250. Games slightly on discount, or games on high discount but not really worth it. Series X plus Modern Warfare 3 and Diablo for high prices of $400. Well, these are all pounds, 250 pounds. So this is still, well, it definitely makes sense. Video Games Chronicle, being a UK-based website, is still talking in pounds, and they're probably talking about the Amazon.uk website, not Amazon.com website. So the sales might be different there. And there's my interstitial thing, and I just have no idea why it's out of order. I didn't even change the code, so it worked last time I ran it, and it didn't work this time. There's some weirdness there, and inconsistency, obviously. Well, regardless, that brings us to the Gamatsu articles now. We don't have a ton of them. We talked about Pinball M launching November 30th. Let's see. Let's just double check to make sure this already has a follow on it. It doesn't, so I'll correct that and make a YouTube short off of that. Five Nights at Freddy's 2, Help Wanted 2, launches December 14th. Which, yeah. I still very much feel like the Five Nights at Freddy's series is really still doing the same thing, where they're just churning out as many games as he can, as fast as he can. I don't think any of the games really have come out and been amazingly better. This is a PlayStation VR 2 exclusive game, it seems. Maybe that is the Help Wanted series, it's all VR. Bulletstorm VR has been delayed to January 18th of 2024, which is interesting because this would be the first game ever to actually have a release date in January that I can think of. But yeah, it's not a big deal really to delay a game nobody really was going to play anyways, but it's weird to make a VR game of Bulletstorm. It, if anything, I think just highlights that People Can Fly either really has too much of a love for Bulletstorm. I kind of like Bulletstorm, but having played the first game and then them making a remaster and then Gearbox having Duke Nukem DLC added to it that they charge way too much for, and then now making a VR version of it, it's all just a little too much. And particularly Bulletstorm had a lot of sliding and high fast-paced action, and I really question if you can do that in VR without becoming immediately motion sick. I wouldn't be surprised if Bulletstorm VR is not actually Bulletstorm the game and is something only slightly similar to Bulletstorm the game. The general concepts of Bulletstorm, as far as its gameplay mechanics that People Can Fly did, are great, but they really just needed to drop the world that they created for Bulletstorm, which wasn't that good, and the characters that they created that weren't that good, and all the cussing that they added to Bulletstorm, which wasn't that good. And just make a new series and say, hey, from the people who made Bulletstorm, we made another game that is a little bit more down to earth and makes a little bit more sense. Had they just tried a second time instead of reselling the same old game over and over again, it definitely gives off the feeling that Bulletstorm developers don't have enough time or funding or talent to make a new game, and they only have enough funding to sell what is already finished. Yep. Sheeran the Wanderer, the mystery dungeon of Serpent Coil Island, details several elements of its game, if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Yeah. I was going to say, it feels like the developers of Bulletstorm are just turning in the same essay every year. Which, come to think of it, I imagine there probably were some people in school that got away with that. That you're in an English class and you could just do a book report on one person, and then next year do the exact same book report and turn it in again. And, I imagine you might have gotten caught there, but you very well may not have. It's not like teachers keep exact records of book reports or essays you write. As long as it's not too good that it gets published somewhere or gets entered into any contest, you could probably get away with it. Maybe you skip a year. Maybe your writing would be particularly bad a year in the future, where a 5th grade level writing might be noticeably better than a 4th grade level writing, something like that. But no, I think you could probably get away with it. And that never occurred to me. I imagine that probably wouldn't have occurred to most kids, though, to keep your book reports. And nowadays you really could scan in every single document that somebody submits, and you could see if you're just turning in the same reports. Although arguably, if you're turning in the same reports, does it even matter? Or are you just being efficient? Moving on to that rambling thought. Enclave HD for the PS5 launches December 5th. It's currently available for the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. I assume Enclave HD is some kind of old action RPG. I don't recognize this game. Ziggurat is one of the companies that resells old games, ports them. As we see some loading happening here when really there shouldn't be any loading. I also saw on Reddit that there is this accusation that YouTube is adding a loading delay, or experimenting with adding a loading delay to people using Firefox. And I am using Firefox right now. Which, if true, is very much monopolistic and illegal to actively try to slow down your competitor as far as Chrome. Yeah. Well, what I am seeing about this game Enclave is that it doesn't look terrible. Now, what I imagine is the case is that this is a very small game that isn't that long. And definitely it has the visuals of a PS2 era style game. But the HD remaking on it doesn't look terrible. 25 unique missions, probably boils down to 5 to 10 hours at most. But it is also a great example of a game series that, because I don't recognize it, I doubt that there's enough of a fandom to justify rebooting it or full on remaking the game. Like a lot of those type of games, I don't think do justify the idea of reboots or remakes. Duke Nukem is kind of a prime example of that, where you'd have to be very creative and very ambitious to reboot or remake the Duke Nukem games into a new modern series that makes sense and people would buy. We already talked about Harry Kruger leaving Housemarque, but Gametsu also has that article. Atelier I can't even pronounce it. Forgotten Alchemy and the Polar Knight Liberator is coming to the West in 2024. It's a free-to-play game currently available in Japan for smartphones for the most part, but it looks like it will be coming also to Steam. That being said, I seriously doubt this is the series you would want to start the Atelier series on. I suspect each of these female protagonists are from one of the Atelier series. She definitely is from Atelier Ryza 3. Although Atelier Ryza also had several other friends. It was a whole group of people. She was just the main female protagonist. So, yeah. I don't know if maybe it is a case where the Atelier series might be better as a mobile game anyways, though, since it is effectively just a JRPG game, a lot of flower picking stuff, I think, and a lot of potion making. So that kind of grindy mechanics alone might be better on a mobile game overall. It may also be a case that while Atelier Rydo 3 was fairly popular, the newer Atelier game series, which I do believe is already out, is just not really getting that same reception. And they do a applaudable job of really only making 2 or 3 games with one group of people before they move the Atelier series to a different group of people so they can create new characters. But it might have been smarter to really stick with just the Rydo group of people once they had a major success. Because the idea of trying different things generally does boil down to, once you have a success, you should probably stick with the success. But this is probably an example of the creators of the Atelier series actually being allowed to create what they want to create, and thus making overall better products in general because of it. Now you've got quite a lot of high fashion anime characters here, mostly female protagonists, but a few male characters too. And this is quite a lot of screenshots they're showing off. But when you see the little glimpses of what the game actually seems like it is, it doesn't feel like there's much in the JRPG fighting element. There is some relationship building, I think, that you're doing here between different characters, and maybe some potion brewing and evolution of the characters. But yeah, this whole grindy gameplay element may be very minimal. And that is a problem with a lot of mobile games in general, is that you spend a ton of time in the menus where you can see probably 2 currencies and a stamina bar and some other gatekeeping bar, I would guess. Kind of star level. A whole bunch of short shops and elements to move around. A whole lot of interfaces. That's sometimes a problem with Asian games too, is that there's way too many interfaces. Moving on, NIS, Nippon Ichi Software, announces a roguelike strategy RPG called Bar Stella Abyss for the PS4 and 5 and Switch. It's due out February 29th in Japan. This one they've teased over the course of a few days with new bits of information now, actually revealing what it looks like. So it seems like you are playing an RPG game, but then your hub is a bar, and so there might be some bar elements to it. Which it is, I guess, somewhat questionable if maybe that would hurt the chances of it coming to the West, or maybe it would be really censored in the West. It really shouldn't be, but I wouldn't be surprised if you just have your home base as a bar and there's just people drinking alcohol together, that the ESRB decides to crack down on it. You have a somewhat young looking character here, so if she said she was 18, I wouldn't be surprised if the ESRB might have a problem saying she doesn't look 18 and she's drinking alcohol, or she says she's 18 and she's drinking alcohol, and they say, well, the drinking age in most of the United States is 21, so she needs to be 21. As an anime girl, she does not come off as 21. Even this character doesn't really come off as 21, and it definitely comes down to height more than anything. So you might have some weird censorship here where you have characters drinking non-alcoholic fruit drinks, which it definitely feels like they are focusing in on the alcohol. This might be a weird game in particular just for the love of cocktails and alcohol, where a lot of people may not have a love for cocktails in particular and fruity mixed drinks. They may only have a love for straight whiskey or out beer or things like that. Most people, from what I've seen in Bar Rescue, really don't order crazy cocktail type drinks and mostly are just looking for cheap beer and ways to get drunk. Apparently Aonic has acquired In Dreams. Exciting announcements lined up for 2024 and beyond. In Dreams, I guess, was the studio that worked on these screenshots of games. Power Wash Simulator, Far Cry 3, maybe that's Far Cry 3, maybe that's Far Cry 4. Couldn't really tell you these other games though. Some Ghostbusters VR game, I couldn't tell you the name. No idea what this is. Not certain if this is a Call of Duty game. It probably isn't. Synapse, and I guess this is Synapse if I was to guess. Ghostbusters Rise of the Ghost Lord. They've been acquired for $110 million, which that's an interesting comparison to say if one game made $1 million, you would only need it to do that 109 more times, and then you would be able to have purchased In Dreams. In Dreams is a name I recognize. Aonic is not. We will just have to see what happens there. Though they almost certainly aren't acquiring the rights to any kind of Far Cry game. That's Ubisoft owns all that. And now when I look at this a little bit further, this is actually somebody's head in a VR headset, which probably means they made the VR version of Far Cry 3. So, yeah. And this might be a VR headset too, so they may have only made the VR version of Power Wash Simulator, which severely reduces their value to me if 3 out of your 8 games you're showing here, or 7 games they're showing here, are VR games, because VR games just can't sell because VR is too expensive. And if you ever needed another nail in the coffin as far as VR units and hardware being too expensive, take note that there is a lot more people willing to spend about the same amount of money for the Steam OLED version, for the Steam Deck OLED version, than there are people willing to buy a VR headset. Because, yeah, it's just much more of a value to have a Steam Deck and be able to play games portably than it is to be tethered to a PC and wear a VR headset and play considerably fewer games. You could go point by point comparison and VR would fail almost certainly in every category compared to any VR headset you're thinking of, as far as just price and return on investment from that price. Moving on, this week's game releases: Dyschronia Chronos Alternative Definitive Edition and Cud Wafter Converted Edition and more, which, I mean, this is Dyschronia, so is this Cud Wafter? This looks like some kind of moe anime visual novel. Let's see. What else do they have? Meet Your Maker, RED Cherish, and Stray. Well, we know Stray is the game where you play as a cat in the future, so if this isn't Cudwafter, then it's got to be RED Cherish or Meet Your... Is that Maker? Yeah. It says converted edition down here in English, so this has to be Cudwafter. That's a weird name. Let's see. Can I click on it to get any more information? No, unfortunately not. We're still also seeing very small numbers of digital only releases in Japan. Everything is definitely slowing down, but it does just kind of feel like maybe the game releases also have just changed how they are being made by Gamatsu as far as the list, because that does seem like quite a small number of digital only releases. Although we're seeing similar levels of quality games being released on Steam in the past week or two. Unicorn Overlord has 8 minutes of gameplay on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. Rising Dusk is coming to the PS4 and PS5, the Xbox One and Series, and Switch on December 13th. Let's see if this is already on the follow list. It isn't. Typically this would be a game I would ignore completely, but they did bother to make a press release, so pretty much anything with a press release is going to get a YouTube short, if it can get a YouTube short, meaning it if it's not an adult game. Last of Us Remastered being announced for PS5 would I guess be the big announcement. Do they have an actual release date here? I think cynically you have to assume that this announcement was specifically timed to try and get as many people as possible to buy a PS5 during Black Friday, since this game is launching January 19th, 2024, and I wouldn't be surprised if it actually gets delayed 2 or 3 times after that point, and that they just made this announcement as a way of hyping people up. It's going to be a $10 upgrade fee for existing owners. Sony's still very happy to gouge people and not give free upgrades for games, when it really would have been a free upgrade and should be a free upgrade. And then we had already talked about this new character for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R, so I'm not going to cover that again. And that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles, which we probably covered most of these stories already, if not all of them. Let's see. Yeah, we already talked about the Call of Duty developer Infinity Ward opening a new Austin, Texas studio. Indie horror game called Lethal Company has topped 100,000 concurrent users on Steam. The early access briefly passed Team Fortress 2, Rust, and War Thunder on Steam's most player charts, which I guess that is one to keep an eye on. Let's see. So if I click on this, that didn't bring me to where I wanted to go. Yeah, game developer doing a very poor job of just linking to the game, instead linking to this page on SteamDB to link to the game. But yeah, having to jump through hoops and find the right link is not helpful. Just to make sure it gets a YouTube short. And then Half-Life hit 14,000 concurrent players with 25-year anniversary. And in all fairness, I guess that too deserves a YouTube short. Like, if there is ever going to be a reason to make a YouTube short on a game like Half-Life, which I definitely didn't make a YouTube short on, now would be the time as far as the 25th anniversary and it getting an update. I still really hate that the YouTube shorts are labeled as new or trending game, but I haven't thought of a better title to label them as, and technically Half-Life 1 would be trending by some rough definition. We already talked about the VR studio In Dreams being acquired for $110 million in a landmark deal. It might very well be a landmark deal in that no other VR company has sold for anywhere close to that, but that may just be a case of Ionic paying way too much for it. And then this was the Half-Life article, so we already talked about that. And then we normally would do the follow list cleanup here, but weirdly we get this time, which I appreciate that they've changed it, and this definitely highlights that they have identified the problem finally with people having long follow lists and the follow list not loading because of that, the server timing out. But to give an error, giving a different error also highlights that they are working on Steam and Steam as a website too. But of course that doesn't really help me any. Either I can have my macro run and try over and over again, or I can have it give up on the follow list cleanup, which I think for the most part it's better for it just to give up. This is normally the error you get, which is not as good or descriptive of an error. So they may not really have added a new error, that I may have just gotten a different response before. But yeah, it's not very helpful. Here, it's saying this is where you can manage a list of games you followed, but it's not loaded. And I just reloaded the page, and noticeably it didn't reload there either. So, yeah. Ideally, I would like to be able to add more than one follow list and separate things out, or I'd just like their page to work better. I am interested somewhat here as far as how many games have I perfected. Apparently I've perfected 82, and when I clicked on that, I might have just figured something out here. It showed me that I have 4,328 games followed, which obviously the follow list is not designed to actually handle that many. So we're pushing the limits. And so I guess it would be really a question of just what, if any, of these games would I be really embarrassed to have perfected. For the most part, none really, because most of the games you perfect are perfected fairly easily. They have maybe one or two difficult achievement. That's what they mean by perfected, is you just got all the achievements. Honey Pop would probably be the most embarrassing perfected game on this list, but yeah. Now it said 82, but that barely did not feel like 82 games. I just scrolled down, and Honey Pop's not even on this list, so it must have not had achievements. Mahjong Pretty Girl Solitaire is perhaps one achievement perfection you'd want to hide. I can see a few of these games being better off if they were hidden once they add that hidden feature in general. But yeah, most of these are Lego games or just easy games to get all the achievements on, and a lot of games just don't have achievements in general. Master Duel, for instance, some of these achievements are not being accomplished by a lot of players. Tribute summon 20 or more monsters in a ranked event game. This shows you just how many people have played Master Duel and not gotten anywhere with it, that only 7.8% of players have tribute summoned 20 monsters in a ranked duel. Although in all fairness, tribute summoning in a ranked or event duel is fairly unlikely to happen. So a live experiment now, when I click the following list again, will I get the same bug? Yes, I will. So I might very well be at the point where I need to just cool it with the way things are put on the fall list, and maybe I need a whole different system. I might just need to make the following list a lot more condensed and not just put everything that gets a YouTube short on the following list. I might need to just risk making multiple YouTube shorts by not labeling something, which that really wouldn't be that big of a deal. But I do need to fix the following list at some point in the next few months to get it so it actually loads up. Pulling up 4,000 things though really shouldn't be that big of a deal. Like if you can pull up 512, if you can pull up 256 in computer terms, the next power of 2 really should be somewhere around 32,000 or 65,000 entries, just for the way computer entries are programmed. So more than likely it's just an arbitrary database limit that it's running into, or the database is just slow and returning an error because it's too slow. Alright, so now let's try and go very quickly, since we're already 3 hours into the stream, through the new games on Steam, which, let's see, we've got probably a decent amount of games that are going to not be anything of interest. Electronically wise, recovering tapes might be interesting, but video game wise it wouldn't be. Now the problem here I'm running into is I need to close these tabs. Why am I keeping these tabs open? Now my new system only works if the tab I'm looking at is the furthest to the right. So why am I keeping this open? No reason. Why am I keeping this open? No reason. So yeah, I stupidly was keeping 2 tabs open, and that won't work. Now I can middle click and save myself some clicking and mouse movements to close a tab, and it will move to the next tab on the left. And we'll burn through these games as quickly as possible. Pelagos, a marine adventure, I'll give a chance to. Store Simulator. Something is wrong here. Because it was going to the left always, and now it's not. I've had a nightmare of a time trying to get 4 or 5 macros to all work together. And clearly, or 4 or 5 extensions for Firefox to all work together. And yeah. It's just not really working. Moving everything backwards, so you start on the right and work your way to the left, honestly doesn't feel like it actually changed anything other than just flipping everything around. Honestly, it should just be everything starts on the left, and then when I middle mouse click and close a tab, I should move to the next one. See, this is one of those examples where if it wasn't on the follow list, I would make an extra YouTube short. So let's just keep a count on how many duplicate YouTube shorts would I make today if I wasn't putting games on the follow list every time I already label it as I've made a YouTube short. Although right now we're back to adult games. This one is a 2D cartoony style visual novel. It looks like a dark-skinned lady, and yeah, they're calling it a daily life sim. I'd say I think the animation style here is like not particularly good enough, and the interface feels a little rough too. It seems like it's kind of a simulation in that there's 4 or 5 different locations that you can trigger a interaction in, but yeah, this game Plastic Soul is weirdly feels like it's something somebody is trying to animate themselves, but they just don't quite have the skill here. This is interesting that the image, when you hover over, zooms in. Is this something that always happens on announcements and events? But yeah, this game just feels like somebody's really trying, and I would like to reward the trial, the attempt, but the success there is lackluster. It's English in interface and subtitles, 70 hand-drawn images. And it probably is the case where whoever's drawing this has a real love for the character they're drawing and their art style, but it just doesn't quite translate over. I've said it before and I'll end up saying it again, certainly, that Steam is considered a professional storefront for professional products, and if your game is not up to that level of quality, it's not going to succeed. And I'm not going to try and promote it. Here we have The Expanse, which is the first published game from the new Telltale, I guess. Although I question severely whether we'll ever see too many more Telltale games. And honestly, Telltale really should be closer to being synonymous with failure than with something that should be praised. It shouldn't be a phrase that's being used at this point. Here's another game that's already on the follow list, so had I chosen, although I kind of question if I even would have bothered to choose to make a YouTube short on this, this would have been number 2. Even 2 duplicate shorts feels like too many. Here we have a 2D RPG Maker style adult game called Married Life with a Lamia, L-A-M-I-A. I don't think that's Llama. Llama, I think, is L-A-M-A. You have this like one screenshot of an Middle Eastern lady. It looks like Arabian type princess character. And then there's like a screenshot of some kind of cat-like creature, but the vast majority of screenshots are really just showing off the awful RPG Maker game behind it. They want $7.99 for this game, and it is English in interface and subtitles only. So yeah, again, like most RPG Maker games, whether they are adult games or not, the quality tends to be unacceptably low in most people's opinion, including mine, which is really the only opinion I can lean on. Let me see if I can actually show off this next game. It is in the adult section. It's English and interface and subtitles. They are highlighting here in the mature content that all acts will ask for in-game consent via the course of normal gameplay before unlocking this consent content, and will turn on and off at any time from the settings menu. These are sex-based minigames and nudity in the game. Interesting. It's funny how they're phrasing that, because it does kind of feel like we're getting to the point where video games are being made that just demand fictional characters ask for consent from other fictional characters. And for a game called Slasher U, an 18+ horror movie dating sim Act 1, which is way too long of a game, like the idea of a horror movie slasher asking for consent seems crazy. As far as what the game actually looks like, it feels fairly busy, and it feels kind of like an RPG Maker game too, that is probably not actually made with RPG Maker, but it definitely looks similar to one, too similar. The art style is its own unique, almost comic book hand-drawn art style. They want $13.49 for just Act 1, which is way too expensive. You can see liking a couple of these characters, but then here's their wall of reviews, which seems like a terrible image to even highlight and make. Several different characters here. 15 hours plus of gameplay, they say. You can toggle between R and hard explosive games content, which means I could pretty much probably play this game. So it does have me intrigued on that aspect, is that maybe there is something here, but first glance I'm not that impressed. So the best thing I can do is just put it on the follow list and see if people actually review it well. They have that whole wall of reviews, but noticeably on Steam they only have one user review. So where are all these wall of reviews coming from? Are they made up? That's questionable, certainly. This is also a great example of a game being hidden behind the adult only preferences, which means the vast majority of people will not ever see this game, when really it seems like it shouldn't be in the adult section if it's toggleable content. But yeah, the filter system is just kind of crazy. Yeah. And I would almost have to assume what you need to do is you need to re-ask the person, do you want to see this game ever? Or re-ask them once a year. Where if you're going to look at an adult game, it should pop up a warning saying this game has sexual content in it or a lot of violence in it. Do you want to see this type of game? And then there should be a yes, no, and then there should be a checkbox that says no, and don't ask me again for these type of games for a year. Although, what would that look like if you didn't ask again? Because then you just click on a link for a game and it would just take you back to Steam. So yeah, I guess there's just some weirdness around their system overall. We have yet another adult game. It's still a massive amount of adult games. I wonder if it isn't maybe a case that it is just the season that adult games come out crazy in crazy amounts during the November, December months. This one is called Cuckold Princess. When I noticed it was all taken, special MV adventure game, which I'm pretty sure there was another game called Cuckold Princess. So it's like they're making a whole series. It looks like it is a 2D anime style visual novel with this princess lady mostly seeming to be enraptured by liquid tentacles. And there's only one other screenshot that shows a couple other characters that might be the king and queen. This feels like a spin-off minigame potentially for $2.99. It says it has full Japanese audio while interface and subtitle support for English and Chinese. Yeah, let me just check here. This definitely feels like this is the exact same princess character in the other game with Cuckold Princess in the name, so it definitely feels like they are just trying to make a series there. But I would heavily question whether there is room for a series here. In this case, they're saying without consent. So it may very well be in the instructions now from Steam to mention if consent occurs or doesn't occur. That's a better way than using the R word, though, to say without consent. Although, arguably, that is a weird way to say it too. Yeah, it is just in general questionable. Here's another one that I would have made another YouTube short on potentially, although maybe not. Many of the adult games, I suppose, have long-running series. Most of the 3D CGI visual novel ones are these long-running episodic releases. So that may just be the default nature for adult games, is to sell smaller products more often. Which, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Stained glass puzzle. This is effectively a puzzle game, even if it is just stained glass art. So I think I generally have to say no to this. Although for my own personal information, I'd like to see if this ever gets any reviews. Looks like we've got a Frogger game that doesn't look terrible, called Who Let the Frog Out? Frogger clone. We have a Bar Old Pal VR prologue, which looks like it's a bartender VR game where you're actually making cocktails, but I wouldn't want to play a prologue, so that's going to be a no. There we have yet another adult game called New Earth 3D CGI. One of the things I've seen a couple times now, and particularly in this game, is there's an entire screenshot here that says, warning, the following screenshots contain NTR. Warning, the following screenshots contain fem domination, female dominant, femdom. So they're effectively putting out this not sincere warning as a way of highlighting what is in the game as far as a 3D CGI visual novel. This one's called New Earth. It's selling for $14.39. It's pretty expensive. English and interface and subtitles. And I would just have to question its length. It says it has 13,000 images and more than 250 animations. Should be somewhere around 4 or 5 hours, focusing on the fetishes of NTR, pregnancy, and BDSM. BDSM probably meaning femdom in particular. So yeah, fairly expensive for what it's offering. And it really has just boiled down into my mind now that almost all the 3D CGI games for adult games are exactly the same, so we're approaching a point where I would almost say skip over all of them because they're exactly the same, but I can't really do that because then I would basically be talking about half as many of the adult games, and with them being blurred I probably should describe all of them. I guess I'll give the Shadow King a chance. Be fairly generous there. Yeah, and unless I get really lucky today, I'm almost certainly going to go long. So next we have a very different looking adult game called Beer Strip, where it seems like you're playing as a box with bottles of beer falling down the screen and you're trying to catch them. And I guess as you get more points, the 2D kind of realistic CGI ladies on the right seem to lose articles of clothing. So an incredibly simplistic game that makes, I think, a fatal mistake that doesn't happen very often, in that the adult content isn't taking up the full screen, so it's looking way worse, and the mini game is effectively taking up way too much of the screen. Like every single screenshot is the same background, it's the same mini game taking up 90% of the screen, and it's just one slightly different realistic 2.5D 3D CGI lady. In fact, I could pretty much just show you the game because they're not even really showing any nudity here. It's just ladies like this. Exact same screenshot, just a slightly different lady. Now the price is right, I suppose. They had free English for the interface and subtitles. But yeah, really wouldn't expect more. They're promising future updates, more girls being added, but I think the core delivery there is a problem. And then the next game is also an adult game called Lewd Gym. I can't really claim bundling though, that like all the adult games are being listed at the same time now. I think it is more of a case that we're just getting more adult games in general. This one is weird in that you have this red-skinned devil lady and a blue-skinned Frankenstein lady, and then a wolf, furry, anthropomorphized wolf lady. There's a pale white-skinned elf lady. So it's playing into a lot of the fantasy characters. There's a green Hulk like lady, and they're all in the gym, and they're all having adult encounters in the gym, which is somewhat of a fantasy, although in reality it's kind of gross. Gyms are kind of gross, and the extra equipment in the gym is really the wrong equipment that you would want. The gym outfits are not as good as the kind of outfits you could get. I imagine fantasy of having a lewd gym is really just the first baby steps, which I probably should think of a better phrase in this case, but it would be the first steps to just having like a sex swing or other actual like specialty equipment for the purpose of having fun in the bedroom. Lewd Gym, though, is selling for $8.99, which is a more reasonable price. It claims to have full audio in English and Chinese, but not Japanese, weirdly. But it does have interface and subtitles for Japanese. But it is definitely one of those cases where I can show this at least. You're going to have to either be very open-minded to a whole bunch of different monster girls, or you're not quite hitting the one fetish as much as you'd like. Because if you're into furries, you're probably not going to be into devil ladies, and if you're into Frankenstein blue ladies, you're probably not going to be into smaller horn devil ladies or hulks or elf ladies. It's just kind of a little too varied. This is, in my opinion, far further from just like a blonde, a brunette, a red hair, head, someone with blue eyes, brown eyes, somebody wearing glasses, things like that. Like when you're talking entirely different species, for lack of a better term. Ideally, I would prefer to just see a game with Hulk characters, orcs is what they're calling it. Or devil characters, or furry characters. I'd like to see 4 games focusing each on one of those fetishes, more than bundling it all together. Now, as for the actual gameplay mechanic here, it looks like there might be some kind of button clicking mini game, maybe even a rhythm game on it. They're labeling it as a deck building roguelite, so I have no idea how that would work. Yeah, if anything, they're doing a really poor job of explaining what the mini game would be around it. Finally, we get back to a game I can actually show. Apocalypse Run. Well, there's almost an idea there to have a game where you're running across the country and getting inventory items and resources and all of that, but the low polygon CGI element I think really ruins it, and the thumbnail here really does not match the visuals. Seems like you can play poker too to get resources. The danger around this idea, though, is that you're either driving or actually physically running around roads that are just going to be very repetitive roads over and over again. But yeah, with a little bit more visual polish, I would have given this a chance. DMZ doesn't look like anything of interest. Clash of Elements looks like nothing. Gladiator games, we see quite a few of those over the years. Not a ton of them, but too many for how many of them are bad. I think the concept in general just doesn't make sense. A gladiator game is effectively just a very small, simplistic fighting game, and why not just have a full-on fighting game? This Thriller Garden looks polished enough to get a short made for it. This parkour game looks like garbage. This also looks like asset flip garbage. This feels like what they're trying to do is establish that there's this character named Unknown Jones or something. But yeah. At a certain level, I guess if they had made Raiders of the Lost Ark just called Raiders of the Lost Ark, then Indiana Jones would less likely have existed, and we probably wouldn't have gotten in Indiana Jones 2. So there is a legitimate argument to putting the name of a character in the title of a game. But I can't really buy it for video games in particular. I think that may have been a thing more for old movies like Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's not as necessary. Here we have another one of these games that should be in the adult section but isn't, and honestly it feels like this might just be the same developer and publisher doing this over and over again and apparently not getting caught yet, although it does seem like it takes Valve months if not years to finally ban people from posting more games on their storefront. But yeah, there's this game called Sky Hunter, and it's 2D anime girls showing off that they have a level of undress and showing off their underwear, their bras, their panties. And then there's a cheap mini game where you're flying some ships and shooting things floating above the images, which look like they could have easily just been downloaded from the internet or licensed or something like that. No real consistency amongst the locations or the characters. It doesn't look like there's any text or dialogue or anything. It's selling for $1.39. It claims to support the interface of 14 languages. But yeah, unimpressive in its quality and unimpressive in the fact that it is mislabeled and not in the adult section. There really is no question there that there is an emphasis of having the lewd images in the background enough to justify it being in the adult section. Here I have a game just simplistically called Bullet Hell, which looks awful. These fruit salad games seem to be coming more and more often, so I don't know if this is a meme or if this is just a trend or what, as far as a fruit Tetris with real physics minigame. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a somewhat popular mobile game that they're copying. Here we have another 3D CGI adult game called A Touch of Magic, which wide variety of locations and backgrounds, visual novel, a lot of characters, male characters. One of the ladies is in a wheelchair. That's fairly weird. A really burly tattooed sailor like character. Yeah, feels like there might actually be a decent amount of story in this Touch of Magic game. It's $9.99 English and Portuguese Brazil interface and subtitles. It's a visual novel set in a fictional city, a safe haven for fays, magical beings that have been living among humans for a long time, all thanks to the 8 families. It sounds a lot like it might be based off of something like a fantasy novel book, or there was a TV series where there was a fairy succubus lady. Forget the name of that sci-fi TV series. I want to say Fae was the name of it, but Yeah, I don't think that was the name of it. Guess I can show off here. Here you have a 3D CGI lady in the wheelchair. And then here you have a lady in a club. And then here you have them in a library-like room. And then you have a strip club. Probably the same club. I would say this is also those 3D CGI styles that feel a little bit different. It doesn't just feel like this is the same ones being asset flipped over and over again. So I'm going to put this on the follow list just to see what the reception might be on it. The sci-fi series I'm thinking about where the lady was a succubus and they were dealing with a bunch of fae didn't really work out particularly well as a series. And it was one of those sci-fi channel series that felt like they were never funding quite enough, and so they were just always struggling to get one more season to keep on going, to think of some new idea. And yeah, it just didn't quite come out as a finalized product, as a complete smart experience. Well, this game, Play Universo, is only Portuguese Brazilian language supported. Interface, full audio, and subtitles they're claiming for free. It's also on online co-op. I didn't even really need to look that far, because just looking at the visuals I would have dismissed it. Yeah, one of the South American countries, I'm not sure if it really was Brazil, just from what it seems like, voted in a fairly, I will generously describe as wild president, but from what I understood, it was just the best of two bad choices was the general consensus I was seeing on Reddit. So some more wild economics may happen there. We shall see. Or wild stuff in general. Oh Satan, I've gotta hide. Interesting title, but uninteresting looking game. Toon Cop. Now weirdly, I'm going to give this a chance, even though it does probably isn't much of a game. Just really don't want to lose momentum here, and probably am. The vast majority of all the Sci-Fi Channel shows, even though I enjoyed wasting my time watching them, I really was only watching them because I had nothing better to do with my life at the time. But the vast majority of them are pretty awful. I mean, you can't really name one that has a good ending and also a good beginning and a good middle. There's just, I guess I'm gonna say no to this RPG Maker Vision novel game. Like, you either get one that has an interesting start, a couple good seasons at the beginning, and then it gets rough in the middle, and then eventually gets canceled, or it's rough at the start and interesting in the middle, and then it eventually gets canceled. Particularly in the case of Sci-Fi Channel shows, all of them got canceled. I don't think there was a single exception as far as a series that felt like this was the good ending point to wrap up. And that's true for most shows, but it's very obvious in the sci-fi shows that they weren't given even 1 or 2 episodes to wrap the whole thing up together. Or they were given 1 episode when they really needed full season. Just generally, a bad management style, which they never really improved on. Like even now, Sci-Fi is just known for the place where shows go to die. Which, yeah, why don't compare that to something like TLC and Trading Spaces, or the Food Network and Iron Chef, or like Iron Chef was revitalized on the Food Network. It was a Japanese show that they brought back and made a Western version of it. But yeah, Trading Spaces went like 15 seasons. Probably because it's a lot cheaper, certainly, but nobody's going to complain that Trading Spaces got canceled too early. The only TV show series that really work are the ones that are funded by people like HBO, the premium of premium. And I'm wasting time just talking about TV here, just kind of rambling, as we're looking at some pretty awful games. Although the idea of playing as a caveman is not a terrible idea. You just kind of make it a lot better looking. Yeah, unless you have a limited run like Game of Thrones and you have the funding of HBO Max, things fall apart. Even The Last of Us TV series is at that risky point. And plenty of the HBO shows also kind of got canceled. Westworld had lots of praises sung about it, and it got canceled. Pretty much everything from Netflix that people liked gets canceled or it wraps up. I'd almost say yes to this. I do want to see a puzzle game based on these puzzle cards, but the problem is that the visuals are way too busy here. There's just way too much going on to distract you visually from the puzzle. And unfortunately, that does make an argument that this really should just be a solid color background puzzle game instead of having all the cats, which, yeah, we're seeing way too many cats in general in video games. Yeah. Here we have yet another one of these RPG Maker games that has either been censored or should be in the adult section. It's pretty obvious that these latex suits may have shown a little bit more cleavage in an uncensored version. But yeah, as it stands, it's not in the adult section. It's English, Japanese, and Chinese. And I'm not seeing any DLC to put in an adult patch, but it is also just an RPG Maker game. We really don't, as far as TV, have too many shows in the past decade or two even, where the show's just gone on and on forever and it's ruined the show. Like, I think they're bringing back Monk, for instance. Monk went on forever, but it's not going to really hurt the show to add more content there and bring it back. Lie to Me is another one. I think that's the name of that show that they made a movie, or they're going to make a movie on. Well, this is an interesting adult game. It's called Flip Witch Forbidden Sex Hex, and it is, I don't even know how to really describe it. 8-bit pixely, cartoony, colorful, bright neon color pictures of characters. It looks to me like it is a Metroidvania play game, and honestly it looks like a real game, although noticeably there's like a boss fight here with a big topless ogre lady, so you really can't show it either. Yeah, it kind of feels very much like a Shantae game if Shantae was taken to the next level. which makes all the sense in the world. Flip Witch Forbidden Sex Hex is $13.49. For the level of quality I'm seeing, I don't find that to be incredibly poor or expensive. So let me just show the figures here, and then monsters and the sprite characters you see in the actual game. 100 animations, epic boss battles, gameplay information. See big boob bouncing on these characters. Yeah, high level of polish. Noticeably too, this game is very positively received, with 86% positive of 322 user reviews. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and put it on the wish list and skip with the follow list altogether in this case. Now, that does create the weird situation though, where I don't know where I could really play that game. And that's the weird thing, is that Twitch wouldn't appreciate it, YouTube wouldn't appreciate it. I don't know where I could censor it and make footage that even looked slightly interesting if that was the case. Like, there is a point at some point in the future, if we don't run out of electricity or destroy the planet Earth first, there will be a point where we'll have automated tracking and automated image detection that is so good that I could potentially play a game and just OBS by default would be tracking any exposed nipples and blurring it. But we really aren't anywhere close to that. That's probably 10-20 years away. And at that point, maybe then I could go on a wild ride of playing a bunch of adult games, although 10-20 years away would also make me 10 or 20 years older, so maybe I would have less interest in that, although probably not. But yeah, there is a point there. Although, who knows, maybe at that point YouTube or Twitch would be gone, or the rules would have changed, or the rules would have changed and said you still can't do that. I'm gonna give this one a chance. Almost done for today. Here we have a mostly negative card game. Definitely seems like there's a little too much going on, but I'll give it a chance. And then we have some kind of Tetris type game. It seems fairly solitaire meeting Tetris in that you're playing cards upside down. That's an interesting idea. This is an example of a single screen, single color background screen that actually isn't even a single color. But yeah, for puzzle games, I think that works fairly well. And the backgrounds are changing. If anything, I'd say the backgrounds are a little too busy and could be distracting. But yeah, it seems like you're playing solitaire backwards. The question I guess I want to know is, can you pick up a connected group of cards and move them around after they land? Or are you just stuck with them after they land? Then we have what looks like just too simplistic of a Rubik's Cube app to say yes to. And for a second there, I thought I'd be disappointed as far as getting at least one hidden object game with cats in it. But nope, very last game still flooding the Steam market is Hidden Cats in Rome. Right. So that brings us to the end of the show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's a link down below. Thank you for watching.